Hello, you're listening to Revenge of the Drive-In, the podcast where we talk about two movies randomly selected from a list of over 1,700. Our movies this week are Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas from 1998 from director Terry Gilliam, and Hellfest from 2018, the amusement park set slasher film that isn't Tobe Hooper's The Funhouse. And I am your host, Patrick, and I am joined this time by a special guest.
My name is John Brick. Hello, I'm a PhD candidate at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I looked at the calendar today and gave myself just a small heart attack because I'm about 5.5 weeks away from defending my doctoral dissertation, at the centerpiece of which is a comprehensive annotated variorum of Hunter S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which presumably is why I'm here today.
Yes, well, I mean, it has something to do with that, but I remember years ago, you had talked about wanting to record a commentary track on the Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas movie because you had so much to say about each and every scene throughout. We won't quite be doing that today, but I'm interested in hearing what you had to say about it. This is one of the, at least so far, it's been fairly rare. This is one of the movies that I hadn't seen before doing it for this podcast. So, and I mean, I'll just be perfectly honest. I'm not 100% sure what I think about this movie yet. It's still kind of settling in. I did read the book, and I don't remember much about the book. I read that probably 5 years ago now, probably on your recommendation. But yeah, I remember the bathtub scene, which is in the movie, but I remember that in the book, and that's all I remember about the book. But other than the famous opening sentence, of course.
Yeah, it's a weird film, partially because the source material is really weird in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
You go into a bookstore and you could find a copy of Fear and Loathing in current events. You could find it in fiction. You could find it in nonfiction. You can find it in journalism. You probably won't find it in the kids section, but you never know,
fair.
Right? There's
some weirdos out there.
Oh, for sure. It was originally published in November 1971 in 2 parts in Rolling Stone magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And the genesis of the original text came out of Thompson basically doing kind of a journalistic investigation of the death of a journalist named Ruben Salazar, who got his head blown off by a tear gas canister during the Brown Power riots in California. He was in touch with a leader at the time, Oscar Acosta, and it was a pretty tense environment, right? Yeah, he's basically investigating the cops, and as we all know, cops just love being investigated by third parties. And so it was.
Right.
So there was that. Also, Thompson was white. I mean, he kind of a self-proclaimed sort of elevated hillbilly out of Louisville, Kentucky. And so the people who were working with the kind of the Chicano movement, the Brown Power, La Raza, all that activity in that area really didn't take kindly to one of their leaders, Oscar Acosta, hanging around this weird white dude. Yeah. So there was a lot of tension from a lot
especially
of different
if he's wearing that hat all the time too.
Right, exactly. Mumbling about bats.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Sports Illustrated invited Thompson to go out to Las Vegas. He was living in not too far away. He got this invitation to go write a 300-word caption for Sports Illustrated, and he decided this would be a great chance for him to just kind of jump in a car with Oscar Acosta and drive to Las Vegas and just have some time away from all the pressure to just kind of talk things through. And the first trip to Vegas, because there were actually 2 of them. The first one is covering the mid 400 desert race, which was kind of late March 1971, May 20th or 21st through the 24th. So it was just sort of a lost weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And then he went back to Las Vegas about a month later in April of 1971 to cover the National Association of District Attorneys drug conference.
Okay,
And
yeah.
in the resulting text in the book, this is all just sort of one trip. There's the first part which covers the motorcycle race. He gets yanked away from Vegas in a grip of anxiety and paranoia. In reality, there was a month between these two things, but then he goes back to cover the drug conference. So there is perhaps more so than other film adaptations of literary works or real events. There's a lot of really verifiable, tangible history that went into this, but the book becomes sort of this weird exercise in journalism, fiction, nonfiction, social commentary. Like the number of labels that you can attach to this book are endless.
There's like one other thing I remember from the book, and it kind of pops up in this movie, but there's like an extended period where Thompson is basically just discussing the 60s and what happened and all that stuff. And we see that here with the flashback, where we see actual Hunter S. Thompson. I thought that was neat. We also, one of the people there, well, first of all, I did not know this going in because I had never seen it. I obviously knew Johnny Depp was in it. I knew Benicio. I didn't know that this movie was just as rife with like cameos as it is. A lot of like big names in just like really small parts, and maybe some of them maybe future big names, some of them not really big names to most people, but like to someone like me who likes horror, low budget science fiction. Like I love seeing Tim Thomerson spill a bunch of dirt and sand in Hunter S. Thompson's drink at the race, and I love seeing Harry Dean Stanton in there. But Paul Cantor of Jefferson Airplane is in that scene as well at the club, which is fitting because Jefferson Airplane is performing at that club. But yeah, it's a weird movie, and again, talking about the movie versus the book, the book's weird too. And this is, I'll be interested in hearing what you have to say about it, but I think this is kind of pretty regarded as a faithful adaptation, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
As always, right? It sort of depends on what you mean by faithful.
Sure.
Right? I think it captures something about the most important elements of the book, right? It captures something about the history. It captures something about sort of who Thompson was at the time, or what he has become as sort of a demigod in the American literary pantheon. It captures something of his own particular take on gonzo journalism, this sort of very frenetic, very high octane, high energy, first person subjective approach to kind of putting yourself in the story. Like it's definitely not word for word, because that would be impossible.
Of course.
Right. It's definite. It does not hew to the exact specifics page by page by page by page, but I think the choices that it makes to deviate from the source text and how it requires a lot of interpretation. Because with such a weird source text, you're going to have to make interesting creative decisions about how to interpret certain things. And I think by and large, it gets those choices right.
Okay, yeah.
And I don't know that I could think of a better director to helm such a weird project than the man himself, right? Terry Gilliam is, I think, exactly the one for the job.
I confess this is, to my knowledge anyways, this is the first Terry Gilliam directed film I've seen that isn't a Monty Python movie, which those are kind of collaborative movies. They have more than one director. You know, it doesn't feel like it's truly Gilliam's voice over others. I know his reputation, obviously, with movies like Brazil and this, that he's got a very unique style, and I mean, it certainly comes across in this movie, but I don't have any other Gilliam projects to compare it to, I guess. But, I mean, you got my attention, that's for sure.
I'm in a similar boat. I think I came to this film like a lot of people do who don't really go in for film quite as much. I very much drift along the surface of sort of kind of what's popular, what's out.
Sure.
And so when I came to this film, I did not know going in that Terry Gilliam was the director. I came to it, I think like a lot of people do, is like, oh, here's a crazy Johnny Depp film, or here's a crazy film kind of thing.
Well, it's a Johnny Depp film, but that's very clearly not a Tim Burton movie. And Tim Burton has his own kind of out there style, but it's very distinct to him. And I mean, you know right away this isn't a Tim Burton movie. And I find that so refreshing because Johnny Depp, he's a talented actor. Over time, I've just like, oh, I just don't like him. I'm just sick of him. And it's mostly because he's in all of these Tim Burton movies, and he always feels the same. It was nice to see him doing something completely different. I mean, I got, so Leonardo DiCaprio and the Wolf of Wall Street vibes, obviously just because of the drugs. But I got some downright like Jim Carrey vibes, like when he's walking into the bar before he sees the reptiles, and just the way he moved reminded me of like the really deliberate but like deliberately funny ways Jim Carrey would move in like Ace Ventura when he's just like goofing around. And I don't know, I kind of enjoyed him here, and he's doing his like weird voice thing, which I kind of had to adjust to that.
Well, this might come up later, but the like the movement wasn't something like he's got that kind of particular like angular walk. He's kind of got sort of that like the way he holds his feet. He's kind of like swinging his hips and doing that sort of thing.
Almost a Charlie Chaplin walk in a way, like the little tramp.
I didn't think of that. Probably because whenever I see that on screen, I'm reminded that Depp basically lived with Thompson for quite a while and studied kind of how he moved. That is more accurate. That's not something that Depp came up with as an interpretation of the character so much as it is him representing the actual Hunter S. Thompson on screen. Part of the reason for that too, because he's got kind of that loping walk where he's like I mentioned, right? He kind of holds his feet at a weird angle and sort of swings his hips. That is because one of Thompson's legs was actually slightly longer than the other.
Okay.
Which, yeah, like it's not terribly uncommon.
I think that was Greg Oden's problem. When he went into the NBA, I think they found out that he was like drafted number 1 overall and just couldn't stay healthy. And I think the problem was one of his legs was longer than the other. So I mean, it can really affect you, obviously.
Yeah. But apparently, it's reasonably common, but not to such a pronounced degree that it can cause that big of a deal. But like Thompson had back pain in later life that was, they think that was kind of attributable to this one leg being longer than the other. And actually, in the text, somewhere towards the end of the book, he mentions it. A lot of people who come to the film but have no knowledge of the book or the kind of digging into the man behind the book see that as like the proto Jack Sparrow.
Oh, sure. Well, and of course the Jack Sparrow thing. I don't believe Johnny Depp ever lived with Keith Richards, but that's another famous instance where he's borrowing something from a public person.
Yeah.
All right. So, do you want to get us started on what happens in this movie specifically?
Sure. Let me ask you though, as we launch in here, when you saw the film, like how did you see it? Was it on streaming? Was it? Did you pick up a physical copy?
Is this one of those with different versions and stuff?
No, there are. I work with a couple of different versions of the text for my own scholarship.
Sure.
Being the Thompson scholar that I am, I did pick up the Criterion Collection version.
Okay.
I don't know when Criterion released it, but when they did, they recorded commentary tracks from Johnny Depp and Benicio del Toro, a commentary track from Terry Gilliam, and a commentary track from Hunter S. Thompson himself. So it is. And
when did he's no longer alive? So when did he pass away?
He passed away in 2005.
Okay, that was a little longer ago than I was expecting. So somewhere in the 2003 range or so is when the Criterion would have released this, probably.
I believe so. Yeah. But anyway, it's possible to watch this film with the author's commentary track alongside it, which is and this is towards the end of his life and at the end of a long career. How do I put this? Your mileage may vary on how entertaining it is to have, shall we say, like latter day, late stage Hunter S. Thompson, just kind of getting into his antics over the the film. But
quite frankly, I don't know if I'd want to hear that, especially knowing how he died. He committed suicide and everything. It's like I don't really know if I want to hear from the guy who was probably just really messed up. I mean, not that he isn't messed up in 1968 and 71 and stuff when we're talking about the movie, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's there are pieces of really, really brilliant insight, and sometimes there's just like 30 straight seconds of high-pitched squealing. It's like I said, your mileage may vary.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah, so we start off here with kind of the title sequence with the Ralph Steadman logo, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and it sort of melts into this sort of dripping wax, and we've got this really eerie version of, oh Lord, it's going to slip my mind. What is it? My favorite things.
The music?
Yeah. Raindrops and Roses and Whiskers and Kittens, all that. That's from, is that The Sound of Music?
Sound of Music, yeah.
We have this sort of standard of sort of mainstream American culture, but set into like this weird minor
German,
key.
Austrian culture. Excuse you.
Oh well.
Sound of Music. The Sound of Music. Come on, it's Austrian.
I'm thinking of is it Julie Andrews and spinning around in the
who's
Alps
English?
or whatever.
First of all, Julie
right. This is a multicultural coalition of But anyway, you get this kind of very weird minor key. You get the title sort of dripping into this like bloody wax. You've got historical footage of Vietnam protests and like dropping Agent Orange on stuff. Like the student unrest it attempts.
There's anti-Johnson signs and stuff like that.
It attempts to contextualize the film, and I think that's where the film starts going off the rails for the popular audience, because the marketing for this film, and even now, it's sort of its reputation is sort of like a crazy buddy comedy, more along the lines of Where the Buffalo Roam, and then we launch into this sort of artsy old footage, what's going on here, and then everything stops and we shift at high speed. We've got that wipe that takes us directly into the Red Shark going at 100 miles an hour, and we get the famous opening line, we were somewhere around Barstow on the edge of the desert when the drugs began to take hold.
And they never give up their hold, basically, the rest of the movie. He's like constantly on something. It's like one of like 4 different things, sometimes a combination. Mm-hmm. After a while, like I know a little bit, obviously, about Hunter S. Thompson and his history with this, and I knew, obviously, I read the book before, but I was waiting for that like one scene where there's some clarity, and there never really is. This movie made me so anxious, and I think mostly in a good way, because again, that's clearly what the movie's trying to do. But yeah, this movie's just, it's relentless, and just everything just feels crazy.
Would you say that anxiety is more fear or more loathing?
Oh, I would say more fear than loathing, but perhaps a bit of both.
Well,
yeah, I didn't loathe this movie. Yeah, I didn't hate this movie or anything. It did make me uneasy.
It's weird, right? Like the original text, what was published in Rolling Stone was apparently received as high comedy, right? Like as Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, like we talked a little bit already about the various labels that get attached to it. But perhaps more than anything else, it is a withering satire. Like it's a Jonathan Swiftian level, Eating Irish Babies level satire on kind of the collapse of the Gestalt positivity of the 60s into sort of the inevitable slide into Nixon's America, Law and Order, Vietnam War forever kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so that opening scene, if nothing else, I think it is trying to synthesize all of those things all at once.
Yeah, and I think that's also a bit, it kind of throws me off a bit, because I like Thompson, when he's written about the 60s, he kind of views all the things going on as, like what you were saying, the positivity. Nowadays, whether it's because of what we have faced in the modern world since the 60s and since the time when this book was written, but when I see stuff like what they show in that scene with the protests and like posters and stuff, I don't really see like a positivity. I see people obviously being motivated to change, but I see some like helplessness there too. So I see negativity too, just as much as there is positivity. I don't know. Like
Thompson himself wasn't Pollyanna-ish about the 60s, right? His first book on the Hells Angels.
Oh yeah.
The Hells Angels played a fairly prominent role in sort of the I don't know. Maybe a better way to say it is they were one of the more recognizable players. Maybe bit players, but still, they're a recognizable face of the 60s. And his take on them was basically that they were doomed, right? That they really, when you dig into them, they represent nothing good for the future of the United States. Right, there's a couple years ago we passed the 50th anniversary of the publication of Hell's Angels, and I remember at the time that there were a couple of like think pieces that came out that basically said if Thompson was writing this today, he'd be writing about the diehard Trump voters, right, and the QAnon types and the
the alt-right, something alt-right.
The alt-right,
there,
exactly, right. He had a pretty keen eye for the good and the bad, but like when he talks about the 60s, when he talks about it in the most positive terms that he uses, they're almost always sort of like personal moments, right? He very rarely points to someone and says, "Oh, that person was the saint of the '60s," right? Or like this movement or this force or this time embodied all the hopes of a generation, right? When he talks about the '60s in very positive, glowing ways, he tends to be very general and very broad about that, unless he's talking about a very personal memory. But one of the things I wanted to point out here with the film specifically is the music. Because I think I first read Fear and Loathing when I was maybe 15, 16. First got my hands on a copy. I had seen the film first, not knowing what it was. And, there's a book. I should read this. And I read the book. But I think I only realized, like, last year. In the book, there are two songs that are played one on top of the other. They're playing simultaneously in this car. And I don't think that they could get the rights for all the music, especially some of the Rolling Stones music.
They play the Rolling Stones at the end of the movie, but that's it.
Right. And one of the commentary tracks, like, I think it's Leila Nabulsi, the producer, says something along the lines of, like, finally we get the Rolling Stones. Because the Rolling Stones start this book. And in the beginning, in the first scene, you have Brewer and Shipley's One Toke Over the Line, which does make it into the film. But in the book, simultaneously playing is Sympathy for the Devil. So you've got, like, in a nutshell there, you've got kind of the kind of that upbeat, happy, like, one toke over the line, sweet Jesus, right? You've got this kind of happy, bouncy beat. And on the other end, you have possibly one of the darkest, grimmest incarnations of a Rolling Stones song. And
it's got a bit of a bouncy beat, though, too. I mean, that Keith Richards playing the bass on that song is pretty amazing stuff. But no, I get it. Sympathy for the Devil, thematically a very dark song.
Yeah.
Yeah, it that would fit with this movie pretty well, I think.
In the book, you have both of those playing simultaneously. Here, you have something similar, but it doesn't quite come across musically that we are diving into sort of two men taking one last 60s style run amok trip.
Trip in two senses.
Yeah, really. Right, exactly. While the rest of the country, like, they're going to the last place where this is possible, while the rest of the country slides deeper and deeper into sort of that post-60s funk, Nixon's America, Law and Order kind of grimness, if that makes sense.
Right, yeah.
I love Benicio del Toro in this scene. He is a fiend. I don't know what I still, even when I watch it now, I don't know what to make of him. He manages to bring across the ominousness, right? The unpredictability of Dr. Gonzo in an effective way.
Interesting. He has a very different energy to Johnny Depp in this movie, but like in a way that I think is unpredictable, I think is a good word. Like, there are moments where he is so much more with it. There are moments where he's almost guiding Johnny Depp, and then there are moments where he's just off in his own world, and it's really, really weird. And it's I guess not a consistent performance, but I don't say that as if that's a mistake or anything. That's just kind of chaotic.
Yeah, the original text was written. Thompson didn't use his actual name until the book came out. Yeah, it's written by Raoul Duke, his pseudonym. And so in the book in the book or the original text, you have Raoul Duke and Dr. Gonzo being sort of the analogs of Hunter S. Thompson and Oscar Acosta. But yeah, the that kind of unpredictability, that dark energy that Benicio brings to the role, I think part of that comes from the original text too, insofar as like Raoul Duke, or Thompson's character, still has to maintain a certain journalistic capability to observe. Like, it's still very participatory, right? He kind of makes himself and his experiences the story here, but he has to keep himself one step removed. And Dr. Gonzo doesn't have to do any of that.
Right.
Dr. Gonzo needs no restraint, and he can plunge even deeper into whatever.
Yeah, this is a pure vacation for him, I guess.
Yeah. What did you make of Tobey Maguire's appearance?
That was the first, like, oh, this person's in the movie moment I had. I mean, first of all, they like pull up. He's on the side of the road, and I'm like, I think that's Tobey Maguire. I wasn't sure because he's like an albino with like the long blonde hair. He was just like weird, and it seemed like he didn't have more than 2 or 3 lines. He's mostly just an observer when they take him along. Which, I mean, I gotta say, I'm with him. Like, if I were in that scenario, I don't think I'd be saying a whole lot if I'm driving with those guys and one of them thinks there's bats everywhere and the other is just, doesn't he pull a gun out in this scene? I mean,
Dr. Gonzo does.
There's just crazy stuff going on. Like, Tobey Maguire doesn't really make much of an impression, but how could he compared to the insanity of what's around him, I guess.
Yeah. He couldn't shave, like, he couldn't, the hair is not his own, basically.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, so I kind of figured it.
Yeah, so he had to wear a bald cap in the middle of the desert. And so watching him get progressively sweatier and grosser, it really works well as sort of a reflection of just how increasingly terrified he gets.
Oh, and in general, too, you know, regardless of him, this is one of the sweatiest movies I've ever seen. Just everyone is, and it helps, too, because the camera is so frequently tight on somebody's face, usually Johnny Depp, but there's, like, always sweat. Everything is moist and just, like, disgusting, and it's like, I mean, it makes sense. It's in the desert and everything, and just plus with all the drugs they're taking, I guess it makes sense. But, yeah, that adds to the anxiety that I am getting from this film, I guess.
I wonder how much of it is a deliberate choice, or maybe a better way to say that is, I wonder to what degree that choice is deliberate, because there is a critique of the kind of the plastic, mass-produced mainstream America going on here, and I think that the film, perhaps even more so than the original text, brings in an element of human grease against that plastic America.
Sure.
But like I said, I don't know how. I don't know to what degree of deliberateness that is done. But it is effective, and that is another area where Benicio del Toro really shines.
Also, did he gain weight for this movie? Because
yes.
I mean, he's in that opening scene. He's driving. I'm not used to seeing him that heavy. I haven't seen him in a bunch of movies, but he's heavier than I'm accustomed to seeing him, I guess.
Like, this film really abused some of the sex symbol appeal of its lead characters, right? Like Johnny Depp, you know, the heartthrob. This film comes out in early peak Johnny Depp heartthrob, and there is a delicious reveal a little bit later in the film in the Mint Hotel lounge where he whips off his hat and he is bald.
It's more like it betrays the sex appeal,
right,
I think. Right.
And now Thompson was
doesn't Johnny Depp have that like bald cap thing going in Black Mass from like a few years ago? I feel like he looks just like I'm gonna look that up.
Yeah, you're gonna have to. I didn't see it. Oh no, wait, yes, I
didn't see it either.
I did see Black Mass, and it didn't look as natural.
Oh yeah,
as this.
No, it doesn't look as natural, but he does look kind of similar with the same kind of baldness. This is kind of.
This movie flings the broken, bloody remnants of Johnny Depp's sex appeal in the face of its audience.
We're talking about a guy who was sexy even when he had scissors for hands.
Yeah,
think
exactly.
About that.
As a point of historical interest, Hunter S. Thompson himself shaved Johnny Depp's head.
Interesting.
And the whole like screwing with the sex appeal just to loop things back. They did the same thing with Del Toro, right? There's the scene in the Beverly Hills Hotel where he stands up from the table and the camera is just tightly focused on his gut.
Yeah.
So yeah, they kind of explain their rationale, their raison d'etre to the hitchhiker. Nominally, they're going to cover the Mint 400 desert race, but they're also in search of the American dream, and the only way to do that is in a fire apple red convertible and at least half a pint of ether, or however that line goes. Do you have much experience with representations of Las Vegas in film?
A little bit. Well, first of all, I mean, I've been to Vegas a number of times because my brother used to live there. But I wanted to bring this up at some point because this movie takes place in 1971, which is the year that the James Bond film, my least favorite James Bond film, Jim's least favorite James Bond film, my usual co-host, came out, and that is Diamonds Are Forever. There is a decent amount of that movie takes place in Las Vegas. It takes place in the downtown part of Vegas, which is the Fremont Street, which we see here, which looks awesome what we do see of it, because as I understand, I had never heard of the hotel, the Mint. I had never heard of that hotel, and I looked it up, and it was gone in the 80s or something, so that wasn't around. So I don't know if they're doing that with sets or if there was a matte painting or whatever, but it looked really neat. But anyways, Diamonds Are Forever, 1971. There is a car chase in the Las Vegas, in the Fremont Street section of downtown Las Vegas, and it is possibly the worst car chase in movie history. It basically just goes around like one block over and over again. It's so embarrassing.
Doesn't at one point they reach a dead end and then Bond does a 3-point turn and then just drives the other way?
I think so, yeah. It's been a while since I've seen that movie, but there's a reason for that.
I watched the scene you're
good.
talking about, the car chase scene. Trying to find accurate photographs and video of what Las Vegas would have looked like in 1971. It's not easy to do, but all of a sudden
you have to watch Diamonds Are Forever.
Right. There's Diamonds Are Forever here. I mean, it's not like found footage or anything like that, but that's one of the best historical documents we have at this point.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I was far more interested in looking at like the buildings in the background than I was watching the actual car chase.
I don't blame you.
So the Mint Hotel was built by Del Webb, and the superstructure of that building is still there.
Okay.
And it actually, like, the film presents it as sort of like kind of like dark reddish carpet and like dark wood paneling. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is what, like, if you go to Vegas, you can see a lot of that same kind of basic aesthetic in what remains of the Mint, which is now part of Binion's. So,
I was going to ask if that was Binion's. Yeah.
At the time that Thompson was there, Binion's, Horseshoe, and the Mint Hotel were next to each other. And I think it was in '83. It was, I think, in the early '80s when Binion's acquired the Mint. But the hotel tower is still there, although it is currently unused. And like any good researcher, I have been to the Mint, and I tried my damnedest to get into the old Mint Hotel tower to see if I could track down, the actual room that Thompson and Acosta stayed in, which I should acknowledge this in the text. Thompson gives 2 different room numbers for his Mint Hotel room, but there's no way to get in. It's all behind locked doors. The elevator doesn't open on those floors.
Sounds like you didn't try hard enough.
Let me tell you. So the first time I tried, I took the elevator to the top because there's still a restaurant at the top of the old Mint Tower, and you could get up there, but like none of the floor, like the elevator wouldn't stop at any of the floors. So like I took it up to the top, I looked around a little bit, and as I was going back down, I started jamming the button for the floor that I wanted just over and over, thinking, oh yeah, maybe it's an old elevator, right? Maybe I'll just confuse the thing, and and right around,
it's a good way to get stuck there for the rest of your life, too, probably.
I don't know. I don't know if somebody was watching, or whether I just did something weird to the elevator, but the elevator stopped between floors, just froze about halfway down for about 3 minutes. And then it just started moving again. And like, I don't know if there was somebody, like if there was a camera in there and somebody in some back room was just like, I'm gonna spook this kid and like stop the elevator, or whether I did something goofy with the system. But most recently, I tried to leverage my my standing, shall we say, as a PhD candidate, and apparently it's so junky in there that it would be something of a liability to bring someone in there, which I totally understand. But they have from what I have been told, there are no plans to demolish the Mint Tower because it's
They probably never finished cleaning up his room, too, if it's anything like it is in the movie.
okay. That's my headcanon now. The mess
Yeah.
in the Mint
That's
Hotel
the
suite.
reason it's closed down.
It's like a Stephen King sort of thing, where it just the mess in that suite just sort of spread throughout the building, and now you can't get in there. I like
also,
that.
how weird is it that Johnny Depp, who at some point in his career, maybe in the early 90s, maybe it was around this time, had a reputation for trashing hotel rooms, is in this movie trashing hotel rooms. It's so weird.
I would love to get the dates on that, because I don't know how much of that, because he became friends with Thompson.
How
in
much
the
of it
mid-90s.
was through Thompson?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Well, but there are a whole lot of really famous people who have a history.
Oh, Keith Moon.
So they get into they get their press passes, and we have this sequence with the lizards, the lounge lizards.
Oh, yes. This is, I got to point this out because we mostly talk about horror movies on this podcast. These lizard creatures are designed by Rob, I don't know if it's Bottin or Bottin. I have heard it both ways, but he is a renowned effects artist, particularly for The Thing. He did all the effects on The Thing, which, if you ask me, is like the best practical effect ever. So he was great with like creatures and monsters here, and he put in some work for this movie. It looks good.
For sure. That's interesting. I did not know that. Later on, towards the end of the film, Raoul Duke is seen walking around with one of those lizard tails strapped to him, and I thought, wow, I was really impressed on how well that was designed, because it just it moves naturally with how Johnny Depp imitating Thompson's weird bipedal gait. Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. The lizard effects are as practical effects. They're really cool. The original lounge lizard art was, of course, and we can't go through talking about this film without mentioning Ralph Steadman, whose art is closely associated with
Oprah's close friend.
Really?
No, Oprah's friend on the show was his name is Steadman.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
No connection.
Okay.
I'm just making a joke.
Yeah, Ralph Steadman, of course, the English artist who worked with Thompson on his breakthrough piece, "The Kentucky Derby is Decadent and Depraved," and it's sort of the dominant aesthetic attached to Thompson and Gonzo the whole way. That's.
Yeah, the frog. Isn't Dr. Gonzo kind of like a frog on the cover of the book or something?
He has there's one illustration in particular. He's got a very sort of froggy cast to him. Yeah. I just want to say, before we move too far on, there's a visual image here where they're in the hotel suite. Duke has turned on the TV, and there's coverage of the Laos invasion in Vietnam, and the visuals on the TV start getting projected onto the room. And so we see aerial footage of a bomber dropping incendiary explosives on a forest, which is projected onto the thick carpet of the suite. And it took me way too long to realize that there was a carpet bombing joke.
Oh, yeah. I didn't make that connection until you brought it up. That's like a visual pun.
Yeah.
That does exemplify kind of the interesting creative decisions, though, that Gilliam does. A lot of visual stuff. I'm not sure if they're all as motivated as that one, but they're all really, really interesting and fascinating to look at. You brought up the lizard tail.
The very first time I saw this film, possibly because I was conflating it with the source text, I didn't realize that it was made in the 90s. I thought that it was made in the 70s. So yeah, clearly I must have been conflating it with the text. So I thought all the visual effects were, really good for their time, and then somebody.
Oh, that would have. I mean, I think they're good for the 90s though too. We get the CGI of people's faces getting warped and stuff. I mean, it doesn't look photorealistic, but that's also not something that happens in real life. So I think it carries with it that kind of uncanny, just drug trip type feeling. And then when Nixon's face keeps popping out of the TV and appearing and stuff like that, that was great. I liked all the effects and stuff.
The moray eel lady at the desk, the carpet kind of creeping up onto that guy's legs at the phone booth. That's a great effect. And actually, speaking of those little visual bon mots that show up from time to time, there's a couple of places. I think it's in the next hotel suite that they're in, at the Flamingo. But when that one gets trashed, you can see that different carpets Like the carpet from the hallway has started like infesting the room.
Okay.
Like there's like the carpet like sort of like swoops and melds and kind of, I don't know.
Yeah.
It lends to the trippiness of the film for sure. Let's jump ahead to the desert race here, because
Okay.
the race itself. Well, Thompson was going to be paid by Sports Illustrated to go out and cover this race, and that was never published because they asked for 300 words and he sent them like 30,000 words, and so that wasn't going to fly.
I thought maybe it was like he didn't even watch the race, which is kind of what happens in the movie. I mean, he doesn't really.
He did go out. He did cover the race, and I actually this past year was 2021, was the 50th anniversary of the publication of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And so I actually went out to Las Vegas to the running of that year's Mint 400, 50 years since Thompson went. They still bill it as, one of the richest off-road races in America. And it's the film does a pretty good job of what the Mint 400. I mean, it looks a little different now. There's kind of the stuff is more modernized.
Right.
I was impressed watching this film again after having gone out and been to the Mint 400. I was impressed at how faithful that scene is to kind of what the Mint 400 is. Yeah, and that's when, of course, we get our little cameo by Gilliam himself. He's got the long, like, sound recording boom, and he's right up by the bikes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's sort of crouched down. He's got a shit-eating grin on his face. So then, let's see. After that, after we get through the desert race, we get through that absolutely foul, dust-soaked mug of beer. Then we.
Oh yeah, thank you, Tim Thomerson,
right.
just dusting all of his stuff into there.
Well, then we get to this weird sort of middle sequence. It's sort of the connective tissue of the film between the desert race and the next sequence, and they have Duke and Gonzo driving around through Vegas trying to find what to do on a Saturday night. And the images of old Las Vegas are all projected around them. So if I remember correctly, they basically put the convertible up on some kind of stand that could tilt back and forth, and then they had I think it might have been a sequence from an old TV show that was set in Las Vegas, but they had that footage just sort of projected all around them to give the impression, kind of a trippy impression, but still a sense of driving through, Glitter Gulch, right, going through the neon Las Vegas. I will say the sequence at the Debbie Reynolds show, they actually got Debbie Reynolds to record lines for this film. That wasn't like someone else's voice, or it wasn't historical recorded audio
or pre-recorded stuff. Because I saw on IMDb it listed, it said Debbie Reynolds, parenthetical voice or something. And I mean, reading that, I would have thought like, oh yeah, they just took a previously recorded thing. It's fascinating to me. I didn't know.
Yep.
they got a fresh recording of Debbie Reynolds in there.
And she was playing the Desert Inn in 1971. She was there. That is 100% true. Guy Lombardo was in the Blue Room with his Royal Canadians. All that is verifiably historically accurate. They couldn't get...
Is it also verifiable that Duke and Gonzo were friends of Debbie, as they claim to be in this scene?
That I have not been able to dig up any kind of proof of that, no.
Okay.
They couldn't get the rights to use the Circus for the
I noticed that.
Film.
Yeah, they didn't use the name Circus. It was just like Circus something.
The Bazooko's Circus.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, but that was. I mean, this is sort of a comedy movie. We're not talking about it as if. I mean, it's not one of those comedy movies, but I will say the scene of them walking up to the Circus was that had me like laughing pretty hysterically because they start walking. I think they take ether right before going in, and then this is Johnny Depp's narration is telling you about like how it affects your movement and stuff like that, and we're seeing this shot from like chest up, and we could see they're moving a little weird, but they they're walking, and then we cut to a shot from behind them, and they're like they're just stumbling around, and that was very funny to me. I thought that was a really well done little edit there.
There are elements of physical comedy to this film that with everything else that people talk about with this film. That just like there's no time to get to that. It's underrated.
Okay, sure.
Now, and I will say, once they get inside the circus and they go to this casino that has this just absurd, I think perhaps the most Monty Python-esque sequence in its absurdity. They have the gymnasts and the acrobats doing their
Oh,
thing.
yeah.
And it's this weird, like, birth of an American space baby gymnastic routine over this pit filled with gambling tables and jugglers and all that kind of stuff. From what I've seen, what little I have seen about people kind of doing what we're doing, right, commenting in some detail on this film, people tend to think of this as one of the weirder liberties that the film takes with reality.
Okay.
But I think those people have never been to the actual circus because this exists in reality.
Really?
Yeah.
This specific circus act. I mean, they've got like an amusement park inside the circus now. I mean, I don't know. They've got a bunch of stuff, but
well, the casino, the casino's still there. The circus is still there.
Sure.
And there is still it's not so much like table games. It's mostly slot machines now. But there's still a like an acrobat performance area
like above the thing. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So on the main floor, you've got what right now it's mostly like slot machines kind of games. In 1971, it was more like you see in the film with the gambling tables and the table games.
And Pendulette. And
right. Is that Pendulette?
Yeah, that was.
Oh, man. Okay. He was one of the few people that's like, that. I should know that face, but I didn't know who it was.
We saw Vern Troyer earlier in the movie. He was at one of the casinos. Vern Troyer, a.k.a. Mini-Me.
Oh, yeah. He's he sneaks inside the cape with a stack of $100 bills or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, the circus is one of those things that we see in the film that looks like it's an absurd exaggeration that is actually a bit more faithful to the reality, right? The merry-go-round.
Do they have the spinning bar?
Yes,
because
I was just about to say the merry-go-round bar. That is the real thing, okay. That's still there. It doesn't spin anymore.
Okay, I was going to say, because there would be people throwing up there.
Oh, yeah.
I'd be one of them, I
think.
Well,
and now it's an ice cream bar. And it really is like a carnival midway full of like, pop the balloon and knock down the milk bottles with a baseball kind of games, right? The kind of the fun fair.
Some of the stuff we see in Hellfest. When that guy struggles to win a little doll for his kind of girlfriend.
I wondered if that was the connective tissue between having these two films together.
There's one very loose connection, I guess, to be made.
Yeah.
Also, I'll just say not much plot in either movie.
That's true.
Connection. There's another one.
Yeah. I don't know. I would have to talk to a bunch of people who have seen the film and then read the book. But I would love to know how many people see this film and then who have not read the book and then go to the book and then all of a sudden the film makes more sense, right? I've studied this for over 10 years now, and I've lost all perspective on what does come across as intelligible in this film in terms of plot and structure and theme, because it's all just enmeshed in my head at this point. Yeah, like it's the film has less of a plot unless you are more familiar with the book, perhaps. I don't know. I've lost lost the ability to tell now.
Right.
The shot of them walking at the end of this horrible carnival scene, Benicio del Toro is just leaning farther and farther and farther back, and then we get to a point where he defies physics in the way he's walking. I guess that was just a neat practical effect with a floor that tilted, and so.
Yeah, I get they probably have stuff like that at the circus, like, the way they have like a funhouse mirror and stuff. Like, sure.
Yeah, they didn't have that when I was there, but my understanding is that it was like a tilted floor, and so in that shot, Johnny Depp is actually leaning forward really far. And yeah, it's
interesting.
It's since we were talking about practical effects earlier. So then we get into the really heavy duty sweet trashing. Like after they get back from the circus, they get back to their Mint hotel room, and
which I want to say most of the trashing we don't see the trashing take place so much as like we see kind of the aftermath of it. We see it kind of like creatively depicted with people just kind of going crazy, I feel like, usually, and we don't see like And then, I don't know, and then, it's like, in the morning, then we kind of see what happened. I don't know. It's interesting.
That's interesting. I hadn't noticed that, but I think you're right. I don't know if that was a practical choice. It's not really described so much in the books either, and I don't know how much time.
Yeah, I would imagine it's mostly just like a thematic isn't the right word, but just like a more authentic depiction of someone who's on those kinds of drugs, right? Like when this stuff is happening, they don't even necessarily realize it. And I mean, listen, I've never taken any of the drugs that are talked about in this movie. I can't say with any kind of certainty, but I feel like in those scenes when, like, someone wakes up, like in the scene when Johnny Depp wakes up and then a room service guy comes in and he doesn't really mean to be pointing the gun at him, but he wakes up holding the gun, so the guy freaks out.
Yep.
And like scenes like that, those do feel very much like I don't know, you're waking up after like a awful binge on something, and you don't quite know what happened, but you look around, you see something happened, obviously.
Despite my deep scholarly interest in Thompson, I have also never taken any of the substances mentioned in this film or in the original text. But I have to imagine that it's sort of like when you're in an old video game and the processor's chugging along, and elements of the game just sort of take a while to pop in.
Okay.
A little bit like that, right? Like reality. You wake up and reality is not quite popping in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so is that Cameron Diaz in the elevator?
Yes. Yeah.
Are there any other faces that I'm supposed to recognize? Because there's the photographer Lacerda.
No one that I've noticed.
And that's good. All right, I feel a little bit better now because I just realized that was wait. Now was it Penn or Teller who was in the Circus?
Penn. Teller is the one who doesn't speak.
Oh, right. Okay.
I don't know if that's why he's called Teller, because he can't tell anything, the whole thing. But yeah, Penn is the big guy. Not
to jump too far along here, but we're coming up on that bathroom scene that you mentioned earlier, which features a absolutely filthy, disgusting Benicio del Toro thrashing around in, maybe we'll go from sweaty and moist to like the gross bathroom steam that gets when you've got a lot of hot water. Yeah. Like that whole scene, you've got like grapefruit rinds and beer cans, and he's still got half of his suit on. And I think the thing that sticks out the most is the tighty whities.
Sure.
That scene is a masterclass in just that human grease element that I mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. But interestingly enough, and this is something I turned up as I was doing my Variorum, which compares different versions of the text, the bathroom sequence does not appear in the original Rolling Stone version.
That's interesting, because that's like the scene that I remember most from the novel.
Yeah, and it is absolutely one of the most vivid, right?
Right.
Because you have
yeah.
Dr. Gonzo with a death wish. Right?
Yeah.
Thrashing around in the bathtub, and you've got Jefferson Airplane blaring. That sequence does not appear in the original version of the text. And I don't know if it was in there originally and they cut it out, and so Thompson wanted it, and so they put it back in the book version. Like there's a blank space in the history of this book.
Sure.
Somebody I'm sure would know, but like in terms of what's known to scholarship right now, who knows if that got written afterwards or what. But yeah, the original, if you were to pick up a copy of Rolling Stone in November 1971, you would not have encountered Dr. Gonzo in the bathtub.
Which is probably how you'd prefer it, if we're talking one reality here.
Yeah. And then that leads us right into the flashback sequence in the Matrix.
Yep. So this is the Jefferson Airplane playing, and this is where Hunter S. Thompson, and it's funny because it's a cameo, but the film acknowledges him. Mm-hmm. It's like present day Thompson, or I guess past Thompson, Raoul Duke recognizes actual Hunter S. Thompson, which is just kind of like a weird kind of meta moment. I don't really know what to make of it, I guess. Thompson
was notoriously difficult to work with, I'm told, and there are, again, with the Criterion Collection version of this, there are a couple of scenes. There's a couple different versions of this scene, and Thompson's favorite was one where he lunges across the table and like manhandles Depp's face, or like slaps him across the head or something like that. They didn't use that in the final film.
but it was filmed, so it's like an outtake,
Yeah,
somewhere, a
exactly.
deleted scene or something. Okay, interesting.
I was in San Francisco last July.
Oh, that's right. This is San Francisco. I forgot
Right.
that.
This
Yeah.
this flashback is back in San Francisco because we're in the book. This is where Thompson starts to kind of wax poetic about his personal experience of being in San Francisco in the middle '60s and all the things that were happening with the music and the LSD and the
Yeah, he always
counterculture.
says the middle '60s. That's such a weird. Like anyone else would just say like the mid '60s, right? But
I'd never thought of it that way. That's an interesting.
I've just always heard mid '60s or mid '50s or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Huh. I hadn't realized that before, but yeah, it does. It puts a different music on that phrase. But anyway, yeah, the film's version of the Matrix makes the Matrix look like a huge industrial warehouse, and like even the bathroom is huge, where Flea comes in and starts sucking on the sleeve of his.
That's
red
right.
Pendleton
There's
sweater.
another. Flea, another cameo. That's right. Yeah.
The actual Matrix itself is kind of a hole in the wall place. It's actually a pretty small place. It's the White Rabbit now. It changed. It's not the Matrix
it's
anymore.
named after a Jefferson Airplane song. Okay.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty tiny place.
I was actually just at a bar here in Oxford called the White Rabbit.
Oh yeah.
Just 2 nights ago.
Huh.
Nothing like the scene here in the Matrix. Nothing like that atmosphere.
So yeah, so that Matrix flashback, which features producer and sometime Thompson girlfriend Lila Nabulsi in the role of Grace Slick, singing famously "Somebody to Love."
And we don't see her that close on, but just like from a distance, that is a very Grace Slick looking
Yeah.
figure shape, I guess. I don't know. I mean, the hair, I feel like they got that right.
Yep. That leads us into I think I called it the what was it? I called it maybe the literary climax of the film. It's the sequence that is referred to both in the book and in this film as the wave speech. And this is where we get more of the old footage from rallies and protests. We get some Woodstock here. We get, a couple of naked hippies and people getting chased by cops and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And this is where Thompson reflects on his own personal experience. He kind of he encapsulates the spirit of the 60s in terms of his own freedom, right? He talks about
it's the most beautiful prose in the book, and it's like kind of how Thompson doesn't really. It's almost like he's kind of romanticizing it, but he's also, in a way, he's also kind of de-romanticizing it. But I don't know.
His romanticizing it is in strictly personal terms. And you're right, like we were talking about earlier, he doesn't really point to a particular organization or a particular individual and say, aha, this is what
Right.
represents the high ideals of the 60s in its purest form, right? He's more inclined to bag on people he sees as crippling that energy. Like Timothy Leary, he really has some real vicious things to say about Timothy Leary in this book.
Well, and it's kind of ironic too if you were to look at some of the, maybe Thompson doesn't write about these people, but some of the people that we would kind of hold up as like positive figures from the 60s, like their story in the 60s becomes a negative story about the 60s too, because you could talk about Martin Luther King and he's assassinated. Like, what does that say? Or Robert Kennedy, who, no one ever talks about this, but he spied on Martin Luther King. Like, he has some pretty negative stuff going on in his political career, but then also he was assassinated. Like, this. So I sort of understand, not necessarily saying that this is the same thought process that Thompson's working with, but I do understand, like, the not wanting to kind of deify a certain figure because you're always going to come to something negative from that, even if it's not them specifically.
I think that's maybe one of the reasons why the wave speech holds up, right? Besides the basic poetry of the language, which Johnny Depp does give a pretty good reading of here, I think. But Thompson he not contextualizes, but he describes his memories of the 60s in terms that are totally unique to him. Right? He talks about, my central memory of that time seems to hang on 1 or 5 or maybe 40 nights or very early mornings when I left the Fillmore half crazy, and instead of going home, aimed the big 650 Lightning across the Bay Bridge at 100 miles an hour, wearing LL Bean shorts and a Butte sheepherder's jacket. Right? He talks about driving at night, much like he does when he ends the famous passage of his about the edge that ends the Hells Angels book.
U2 was around back
It's
then?
all in personal terms. Yeah, this is the elegy for his experience of the 60s and whatever sort of general energy. He calls it the peak. San Francisco in the middle 60s again, was a very special time and place to be a part of, right? It seems entirely reasonable to think that now and then the energy of a whole generation comes to a head in a long, fine flash. He's not going to be specific about it, but he respects and mourns
Yeah.
the passing of that long, fine flash. And that ends essentially the first half of the book. There's a definite division where there's definitely more comedy and upbeat hijinks in the first half, and in the second half we really start sliding into the 70s, a much more oppressive, paranoid, anxious sort of environment.
Yeah, I will say for the speaking specifically in the movie now, like the passage of time was not all that clear to me. I mean, we'll get to it, but you mentioned that this was born out of two different trips to Vegas, and where that kind of made sense to me was we have the scene when Duke is leaving his hotel. He's trying to just skip town and not pay the bill, right? And then because he knows Dr. Gonzo has already left, and he gets a telegram from Dr. Gonzo that's meant for Thompson, not for Raoul Duke. But then he just like goes around and he goes to a new hotel and Gonzo's already there. It's like, what? We just saw him getting on board a plane, and it's really kind of confusing. It makes sense to learn that this was two different trips because it just like as the movie together, I don't want to say it doesn't work, but it just feels kind of odd, I guess.
Yeah. It's one of those weird wrinkles that you can get away with in the text a little more easily than you can in the film adaptation.
Yeah.
But it's got to be, right? He's got to walk into that suite at the Flamingo and see Christina Ricci whacked out on drugs trying to bite his ankles off.
Yeah, I guess. If we have to go there.
We are, of course, overlooking the cameo of... what's his name? It's right on the tip of my tongue. Gary Busey.
Oh, yeah. First of all, it took me a while because when he he pulls him over, but there's this long thing that was kind of amusing about how, if a cop's trying to pull you over, what you shouldn't do is just pull over immediately. You should instead speed up because they'll follow you and they'll be happy to follow you, and then you'll throw on your blinker and then which lets them know that you're just looking for a place to pull over. And then he does like a high speed 90-degree turn and stuff. Anyways, this is Gary Busey. First of all, again, we were talking about Benicio del Toro gaining weight. Gary Busey is packing some extra pounds in this movie.
Yep.
But yeah, it is great to see Gary Busey here.
Yeah, that sequence about like how to deal with the highway traffic cop hits a little bit differently in 2022 than it perhaps would have in 1971. I don't know. Just with all the police violence stuff that's floating around in the...
Yeah, I mean, but is there truly more now than there was then? I don't. I think there's an argument to be made that there probably is just as or the same amount, or there's even less now than there used to be. But I mean, bottom line is, I just found that scene amusing. It was just kind of because he's just doing everything wrong, and you're right. Yeah. You would never want to do this with an actual cop because they might try and and not only that,
blow your head off, is it?
Because he does eventually pull over, but he's got like a car full of narcotics and everything. Like he, it's just like you'd think it would almost make more sense for him to just try and get away.
Exactly. Yeah, and like the conceit of the scene is that he gets out of the car and he's holding a half-drunk can of beer.
Yeah,
it's like, oops, right? But yeah, the line in which Officer Busey asks for a kiss is not in the original text of the book.
What was that then? Why was that? Because that didn't really elicit a laugh out of me. I'm not really sure what that was doing there.
I think it was Gary Busey being Gary Busey.
It was an improv?
I think so. And and Depp's reaction to that of just sort of looking off sideways, not quite at the camera, but just like just at an angle to the camera. My understanding is that was just purely natural reaction. As a Thompson scholar, I really enjoy the the very, very brief scene where Thompson is freaking out in the phone booth and he's calling Acosta. And we get a glimpse into Acosta's office. And it is all like he is like his hair is combed, he's wearing a nice shirt and tie. Like this is a lawyer's office.
Yeah. But also, like, that's interesting too, because we see that Gonzo has a life outside of the chaos that we see, at least to a certain extent. We never see any evidence that Duke does. So that's kind of interesting, just the difference between those two characters. And what I was talking about earlier with Gonzo and Del Toro's performance, he's able to turn it on and off a little bit, like when he's acting crazy, just a little bit. Like he's responsible is a weird word to use, especially when we get into the Christina Ricci stuff, but he like is able to kind of be almost a caretaker at times. But
no, it's weird, right? Because perhaps even more so in the book, because we don't ever see Dr. Gonzo in his office in the book. We have it visualized for us here. Dr. Gonzo is this thundercloud, this ominous, dangerous force of nature. Duke's character is wild, but Dr. Gonzo is dangerous in a way that Duke is not. And to suddenly have that impression of him sort of rattled by seeing him at his day job, it's an interesting touch. And I kind of like you, I don't necessarily know where I'm going with that or what to make of that, except just that it is an interesting touch, and it does very briefly sort of remind the viewer that there is a reality out there. Like this experience in Vegas is not a pocket dimension that is unrelated to the wider world as a whole.
Well, at least it is for Gonzo. I'm still not sure. I mean, just watching this movie, obviously we know. You know a lot about Thompson's personal life, but like this seems to be all of what Raoul Duke is basically, because like he's talking about he's hired to write on the race, and he didn't even watch the race. Like immediately after people start taking off, he just goes inside and grabs a beer, and then eventually he gets in a car, and they're like. And you can't see anything, like any of the actual race, because there's just dust clouds everywhere. It's like there's no real journalism going on, I guess, for like from his perspective. So it's like this really feels like this is all that he is.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about it in quite those terms, but that's an interesting way of reading his character. So then I find it interesting, right? And it's visualized in some interesting ways in this film. We start looping back and rhyming with the first half of the film. All of a sudden, we have another convertible.
Yeah.
We're driving down the road in the convertible. We're on our way to a hotel. We're on our way to check in. Drugs are involved. The same furniture is all there, but the tone is very different, right? In the beginning of the film, there's a lot of warm reds and sort of earth tones, and like it's vibrant and welcoming in a weird way. And when we shift here to the scene of Duke driving back into Vegas in the White Whale, the big white Cadillac convertible, like everything is sort of it's almost a little bit grainy. It's a little bit sort of washed out in kind of a brown a little bit. Like it is not warm in the same way.
Okay.
Right. And if we're sort of tracking that, like mentally, just as kind of a shorthand, I think of it as, the first half is fear and the second half is loathing.
Okay.
Which is not, like I say, that's shorthand. That I wouldn't publish that anywhere except here. But like it does kind of go back in terms of the way the film uses color to represent that sort of slide into something less pleasant, less welcoming, right? There's something uglier going on here, something more oppressive going on. And then we get right into the Christina Ricci Lucy stuff, which arguably is one of the most controversial elements of the film, and also one of the most faithful adaptations of any sequence from the original text.
Interesting.
Yeah,
so what's the deal with Lucy here? I mean, she's got hundreds of portraits of Barbara Streisand, which was kind of interesting, and she's on drugs, which you don't say that about most every main character, I guess here, but
that's right.
But yeah, what's her deal? Like, how old is she exactly? Because that's
Are you like in the
contention.
film or
Yeah.
in
Like
real
how old
life?
is she?
Or
Yeah, how old is she supposed to be here? Because
it is almost impossible to say.
okay.
We are. I think we are very strategically never told.
Oh, okay.
Because like from an artistic point of view, right, having found an underage girl in the airport, given her drugs and taken her to a Las Vegas hotel room,
I get that.
which is what Gonzo does, right? That is a genuinely horrifying thing.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not shown that, right? All we're shown
Right.
in the
Yes.
book and in the text is Duke just going back to Vegas and finding this situation.
Yeah, she's already there. Was it consensual? What's going on? I mean,
Can you have that kind of consent when you've never had
does
a drink
consent
before?
exist in this scenario? Probably
Right,
not.
exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, probably not. And so now I will say that in 2008 there was a documentary on Thompson, Gonzo: The Life and Work of Dr. Hunter S. Thompson. It's an Alex Gibney film and came out in 2008. And alongside the documentary, Shout Factory released a number of audio recordings as the Gonzo tapes. And
Okay.
one of Thompson's journalistic habits was to take a tape recorder with him everywhere. There are a couple of tracks on these tapes in which Thompson, so not Duke and not Dr. Gonzo, but Thompson and Acosta talk about the girl. So there is some actual reality underlying this sequence.
Okay.
But exactly how much of that was genuine, exactly what the terms of that were, it does seem that Acosta found a young woman at the airport and she joined him in some capacity. But there's no damning specifics or anything like that, right? It's impossible to actually say what happened. But they do talk about the girl.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't really want to think about it a whole lot more than that for obvious reasons, but
as far as anyone can tell, that seems to be about as good an answer as you can get to the question of what's up with Lucy.
yeah.
And I don't want anyone to come away from watching this film thinking that Raoul Duke and Dr. Gonzo are model characters in any way,
Saints,
that their behavior.
I
No,
gotcha.
not at all. Right? There's like Vegas itself, right? Like a lot of what's going on in America at the time, right? There's some genuinely ugly things going on here.
Oh yeah, they drop her off at the Graceland Chapel or something like that. There's some kind of Elvis themed wedding chapel. That's where they ended up dropping her off.
I think that's supposed to be like right across the street from the hotel that they are theoretically dropping her off.
Okay.
But even that doesn't quite work, right? Because she remembers their hotel room number and she calls back, and that is the adrenochrome sequence, the terrifying drug substance that Duke takes and just goes completely off his rocker for a while.
Is this the one where he wakes up and this is the lizard tail?
He comes out of that,
when he comes,
adrenochrome experience.
So, yes, this predates the lizard tail, but only just. And this scene is really interesting.
Like visually and in terms of practical effects, I think it is one of the most engaging sequences in the film.
Oh, for sure,
Because like the room changes shape. It like goes from being like a certain length from one end to the other, and then all of a sudden it's like 3 times that long, and you've got Nixon's head coming out of the TV, and you've got
the lighting.
Dr.
I thought
Gonzo.
was really interesting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That changes. Like different lights come on at different points. The camera is always just sort of rocking back and forth, just enough. Like, not quite enough that you would recognize it unless you were looking for it, but definitely enough to kind of work on your mind as sort of this back and forth kind of nauseating weirdness. And then Dr. Gonzo mutates into some kind of hideous beast monster with the yellow eyes and, 6 breasts coming out of his back. And yeah, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare.
Sure, yeah.
Is there anything we really do need to say about Christopher Maloney as the desk clerk here?
No, other than that's an amusing scene. I think it goes on for quite a while, but it's kind of an interesting. I guess we're going to end up talking about it quite a bit here, but because this is the police officers, or what is it? It's a convention for, is it sheriffs or police chiefs or whatever?
District attorneys, but
attorneys, excuse me, but district attorneys, colloquially we call them cops and stuff, right?
Yeah.
But this scene is like a great depiction of what happens when a cop doesn't get his way, and he's just
Yeah.
freaking out at the guy.
Yeah.
And so I think there's like some, modern relevance to a scene like this, but that's enjoyable. This is another, I can't really say cameo because I don't know if this guy's famous. I don't really know what his name, but he's just a character actor who's in everything. But he's the Ace Ventura with Snowflake the Dolphin. He's that. That's what I think of him for. And
Oh, is this the drug expert Bloomquist?
not the guy presenting. I'm talking about the guy
Hmm.
yelling at Christopher Maloney. The guy
Oh, okay,
presenting
gotcha.
is Michael Jeter, who is the clown from Air Bud, and he's
Oh,
also
yeah,
in
yeah.
Jurassic Park 3.
Oh, that's right.
And he's in
that's
the
right. I know
Green
that
Mile.
face
I
from.
think he's the one with the rat in the Green Mile.
Yeah, I absolutely got a kick out of watching Law and Order SVU. What was his character's name?
I've never seen the show really. I just know
Okay,
he's
yeah,
on there.
he's one of the boss cops for the first.
Earlier this season, we did Ghoulies, which features Mariska Hargitay. So we've now had both
There you
lead
go.
actors from SVU in the movies on this podcast.
But yeah, Michael Jeter's character, the drug expert, L. Ron. I think they call him Bumquist here, a kind of a mashup of L. Ron Hubbard and Dagwood Bumstead. But
Okay.
he's Thompson uses the real, like he's a real person, not by that
Okay.
name,
Right.
but his the original text has the real name of this character, and like all that stuff that he talks about, like about the 4 states of being in the cannabis
Yeah.
community and all that, like the stuff that's just really comes across as something that Thompson would have made up as satire. It's all 100% real.
It's very reefer madness, like that. This is what we need to focus on. This is how these drugs are dangerous, and it just doesn't jive with what we actually know.
yeah.
And there's even the scene where they're talking about, this end of a joint or whatever is called a roach because it resembles a cockroach, and Benicio del Toro is like, it looks nothing like a cockroach
Yeah.
or something.
There is a book. It's called Marijuana, and the second edition is called the it's like Marijuana the Second Trip or something equally
Okay.
ludicrous. But yeah, like I have found that line in there where this guy talks about, they call it a roach because it looks like a cockroach. That is a verifiable thing that a doctor of medicine believed and presented to the district attorneys in 1971, and it is just Thompson is credited with writing Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas as brilliant satire, and so much of what he includes in there is not so
Isn't
much
literally
incidental
satire,
satire as he just picked the right details.
You could say kind of there's this satirical tone surrounding the stuff that was actually real, maybe you could say, but
Yeah, oh, for sure. There's no way to verify it, but I am quite confident that Acosta probably said something exactly like what he says in the film.
course,
You'd have to
yeah.
be crazy on acid to think that looks like a cockroach.
Now this scene was confusing to me because is he there? Is Duke there to cover this event as this conference as a journalist? Because I feel like that wasn't really communicated.
And that's the frame, right?
But in
from
real
the
life,
telegram.
Thompson was, yeah.
Yeah. The frame story here is that, he's there to cover the drug conference. But that never resulted in any, like, there's no Hunter S. Thompson on the drug conference in Vegas article that ever came out of this, in the way that Strange Rumblings in Aztlan, his article on the murder of Ruben Salazar, was sort of adjacent to his first trip to Vegas.
Okay.
But that's, yeah, his takedown of the drug conference shows up in Fear and Loathing. We talked about the adrenochrome scene already, but that the drug conference stuff, that immediately precedes that in the hotel suite. And then after the adrenochrome sequence and the various flashbacks with the hotel maid and the lizard tail, and the
lizard
suite is
tail.
just absolutely destroyed, and the weird ape at the circus, or Bazooko's circus in the film.
Yeah.
Right. The last six
yeah,
or
that
seven
was
chapters of the
yeah.
book are basically just the film just goes through them pretty quickly as sort of flashback scenes. Yeah, the film kind of goes off the rails a little bit at the end, because the book, like you were saying earlier, right, there's not a whole lot of plot to give us a narrative structure for the end of this film.
Yeah, well, it's not. I said it didn't really have a plot. It's not so much it doesn't have a plot, but it certainly doesn't have a conventional structure. It doesn't have an A, B, C. It has barest structure. It has is it's kind of a road movie, but that's really
Well, it becomes episodic, right? Like
Episodic is a great word. Yes,
you have the smashing the coconuts briefly. You have like the stuff with the ape in the circus casino, and then you have possibly the ugliest. With possible exception of Lucy, right? You have one of the ugliest scenes of the film where they're in that diner on the crappy end of town and they're threatening the waitress.
Yeah. First, Dr. Gonzo hands her a napkin. I can't remember what the napkin says exactly, but it was basically
Backdoor beauty.
Yeah, that's what it was. He's sexually harassing her. Mm-hmm. And then when she stands up for herself, this is all Gonzo. Raoul Duke just stays there. He's watching. He's like kind of interested, but he's not doing anything. This is all a Gonzo, and this is horribly uncomfortable with how long this. He disconnects the phone when she says she's going to call the cops and stuff, and it's like this is. And I'm thinking too, in the days before cell phones and stuff, if you were in that situation, this would be the most terrifying thing. I mean, it's uncomfortable enough to watch it on screen, but like I'm picturing being in that scenario, and it's just, oh my god, yeah. What are you gonna do?
This is the loathing part. Like I mentioned that shorthand that
well,
I
it's
had
fear for her,
fear and,
but yes,
yeah. Well, but like yeah, like chopping it up, right? Fear can be fun. Fear can be entertaining, right? And the first half of this film,
that's what Hellfest is all about.
Antics. Yeah, exactly. But the loathing really comes through here. This is pure ugliness. And you have Gonzo's active ugliness threatening the waitress, and Duke's sort of passive, just we're gonna watch it, right? And there's that really pathetic gesture of sympathy at the end where he's gonna be a dick and will like walk out with a plate full of food, and then he like thinks better of himself and turns around and like leaves the plate on the table, like that's somehow gonna
like that makes a difference,
help, right? Like, or that's like it's like saying, okay, it's okay, we're not. Kind of the emotional tenor of that scene is final in a way, right? And in the film, we jump right into the final sequence, right, where Duke takes Gonzo to the airport and then leaves town, basically. It is striking, and it is deadly serious and grim and ugly in a way that certainly nothing in the first half of the film is, and very little in the second half of the film is. With the possible exception of the Lucy sequence, right? It's almost like they talked about doing ugly things to Lucy, or uglier things to Lucy, and here it happens, right? They go overboard.
There's more implication with Lucy, and there's more aggression, I guess you could say, in this scene.
Yeah,
and it is uncomfortable in a way, a little different from the Lucy stuff, but equally uncomfortable. Maybe even, dare I say, more uncomfortable. This scene really got under my skin.
Yeah.
And it's weird that, like you were saying, we kind of, I'm trying to remember exactly, but isn't that the very next scene, or it's a scene or two later where he's rushing him to the airport?
I think it's the very next scene. Basically, it's another one of
and
those.
it's like a comedy scene, because he's like, oh, I've never been late to the airport, and he drives through like all these fences. He literally drives onto the runway, and it's like a comedy scene. Like, talk about a total tonal shift. It's just kind of
there's a little
weird.
bit of stuff in the middle there. Right, because in between the end of the diner scene and when that moment where it's like, I've never missed a plane yet, there's just maybe a minute's worth of them driving around like the crappy end of Vegas. And like there's clouds in the sky. There are these all like rotten, like old.
Yeah, because I think they said
Route
the diner is in like the north side of Vegas, which they describe as the shitty part. Know, I don't know.
Yeah,
exactly, but
well, and then Lucy shows up again.
Yes,
Lucy, like they they're
also,
driving
is this
around.
when they run into Tobey Maguire again?
That's in the middle of the film. They run into him in Baker.
Oh, was it? Okay, I thought they ran into him here because never mind.
But it's the same kind of thing, right? Where the ghosts are coming back to haunt them, and like Lucy is disheveled. She's carrying like her paintings of Barbra Streisand under her arm. She looks like she's been through the mill, and she just sort of lurches out into the middle of the road in front of this car, and the look that she gives them is just terrifying. Totally accusatory, like, she knows what they did. And I agree that the transition back into comedy, both the musical cue and the whole like, I've never missed a plane yet, and we're gonna go driving across the road, like that shift is jarring and problematic. But there's a little bit of that connective tissue in between where the ghosts pop back up and they're driving through this purgatorial hellscape.
Yeah, that's fair.
purgatorial hellscape. Talk about mixing my afterlife. There.
Talk about implicating our next film too.
Yeah, right.
But again, more Hellfest stuff.
But yeah, then we get, there's goofiness about, driving the car over the tarmac, and Gonzo gets on the plane and roars off into the sunrise.
And I enjoyed how no one at the airport acknowledges that this is weird. Especially when they cut back to his car and it's just got fence posts all over it. That was kind of just a funny visual.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, if you try and screw with a highway traffic cop, you're going to get your head blown off. Here, they would,
Well, this is pre-9/11, of course.
Right, exactly.
No, this would have been seen as weird even back then, I'm sure.
Right,
yes,
yeah.
You can't just drive onto an airport.
Yeah. Apparently, something like this did happen, although I doubt it was with quite as much fence posts and bits hanging off, but... And then, of course, we get the kind of the parting moment with Duke and Gonzo's getting on the plane, and there's the famous line about, there he goes, one of God's own prototypes, too weird to live, too rare to die. That doesn't show up in the book at all. That's from a different...
Interesting. Okay.
That's actually from...
it's Thompson's words, but it's in something else.
Yeah.
I was going to say, because that sounded like Thompson.
It's 100% Thompson, but it's from a much later piece. It's kind of an obituary for Acosta, who disappeared under mysterious...
It was regarding him.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was talking about him, but Acosta disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and nobody really knows what happened to him, and Thompson wrote sort of an obituary of sorts for him, and that's where that line is drawn from. But then, in the end, we finally get some Rolling Stones. We get Jumpin' Jack Flash, which I have to say, I wish there was more Rolling Stones music in this film. If the Beat Generation...
Never been one of my favorite songs by them, by the way. The Rolling Stones are my favorite band, and it's not, I don't think it's in my top 20 songs by them. Even of the more famous ones, because they have some great deep cuts that, just a casual music listener might not be familiar with. Moonlight Mile, I think that's one of their 2 or 3 best songs. But even of the hits, Gimme Shelter, Sympathy for the Devil, there's a lot of better songs than Jumpin' Jack Flash, in my opinion.
That is entirely fair. I think it's the perfect choice for sort of this ending visual here, just driving out of town. It's got the right stuff to be this song. And it doesn't need to carry any weight. I wish they would have used Sympathy for the Devil in the beginning, right? Because that alongside Brewer and Shipley's One Toke Over the Line. Because that is a thematic.
Yeah. That would have a thematic purpose. This here doesn't really have a thematic purpose, but it has a feel.
Yeah.
A tonal purpose. Maybe.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I think it works fine for the tonal purpose. I heard somewhere, at this point in my scholarship, right, a month out from my dissertation, I can't remember from day to day whether I've said something or someone else has said something. I have it in my head that the Beat Generation was jazz and Thompson was rock and roll. And so to have this film end with that song, that's okay. That's okay. Some of the other songs over the credits, like the cover of Viva Las Vegas, it's that totally kind of misses the point of some of the more literary depth that this film could carry. Now, of course, if they ever do a remake, they're going to have to use High by Sir Sly. As far as I'm concerned, that's the one for this particular property. But now, and I said that specifically because I want this out in the universe. Somebody somewhere is going to hear that and think, aha.
Okay. Well, you apparently have a higher expectation of our audience than I do. So, what did you think of this movie overall?
I think it's probably about the best you're going to get for an adaptation made when it was.
Okay. Sure.
And I think now in the 90s, Hunter S. Thompson was sort of he existed in the general popular consciousness as sort of, he was a thing coming out of the 60s, and then he got goofy, and then he kind of became a cartoon, right? And he actually literally became a cartoon with Uncle Duke and Doonesbury, which Thompson hated, right? And then you had he's a joke. Right, he's
there's the Bill
goofy
Murray movie, which is not a well-regarded movie. You mentioned it earlier, but
there are some people who will say that the Bill Murray film is more true to some of the literary elements of Hunter S. Thompson than this one is. I don't see it. It's a fine performance because Bill Murray's a good actor, but
sure,
as an adaptation of what Thompson is in a literary sense, I don't think Where the Buffalo Roam really holds a candle to this.
Okay.
If something like this were to be made again, After Thompson's death, at this point in 2022, we've had about 10 years of something of a renaissance in academic attention to Thompson, right? The field is starting to coalesce and mature. And I think if you were to have this remade now, you would have more attention paid to elements that get a bit of a short shrift in this adaptation. Nobody is going to be marketing the future adaptation of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas as a goofy buddy comedy the way that Johnny Depp and Del Toro's version is, right? I think people are going to be smarter about that.
The poster of the movie and the images of Johnny Depp with the cigarette, like chewing on that cigarette thing, and just kind of like the goofy smile.
A future version of this might be better in terms of how it's conceived, how it's marketed, how it's handled. But I don't know that they would be able to capture the same kind of performance, right? That like the one that Johnny Depp gave, right? Johnny Depp lived with Thompson. You
don't have that possibility anymore with a newer actor.
Exactly.
He can't go to Thompson and
exactly
learn from him.
Folks, if you're out there listening and however many years from now, track me down. I'm happy to consult on the film for a fee. Give me a call and offer money. But it would be interesting to see how some of the different creative choices were made. Either way, though, it's got to have more Rolling Stones as part of the soundtrack. That's non-negotiable.
Okay. What about just like as a movie itself? Because you're doing a lot of talking about it as an adaptation.
Yeah.
And I agree, it's probably, from what I remember of Thompson and from what I know of him, regardless of how well I remember Fear and Loathing, not an easy author to adapt, obviously. So I do think that this is, in its creative choices, probably a very good adaptation. But just as a movie, though, what are you thinking?
I think as a movie,
because I still don't really know what to make of it.
Yeah, I don't know how it works as a movie. My instinct, gun to my head, I would probably say it doesn't work as a movie because as cultural commentary, it's not really clear what it's commenting on.
Yeah, I was going to say you see an American flag so frequently in this movie that's clearly a choice. That's clearly like just walking around with an American flag. I think the American flag might fall in the bathtub at some point, but there's, especially as the movie went on, there's more and more flags, and it's like they're trying to do something here, but it's never really clear what.
Right. Like if something in this movie was set up to be clear that this was kind of a eulogy for the 60s right on the cusp of the 70s, right? Like if somehow Nixon and what he represents is more of an entity in an adaptation, maybe that makes more sense, right? Maybe that sets a clearer stage. At least people are going to know what they're getting into.
It also makes it weirder, the movie came out in the late 90s. I mean, you kind of have to defend it as being relevant, for lack of a better term. Like, because when the book came out, this was a current thing, and the film, it by no means is. I mean, you can maybe draw parallels to the world of today, which we've done a little bit of here and there, but
as a narrative, the familiar markers of a narrative aren't there. As a narrative film or as a historical document, it doesn't quite work because we're kind of removed from that in ways that the film doesn't respond to. And then like as an art film, it's so tied to a specific moment in history that it doesn't really sort of kind of achieve that sort of I don't know what the word is, but it's held back by being tied down by the history and the lived reality of the film. So like purely on its own merits, this film makes the most sense when you have read the book and know a thing or two about the author. And without that, it is an oddity, and it is sometimes an entertaining oddity. But I don't think you walk away from that thinking like, damn, I want to go run out and buy the Criterion collection of that.
Yeah. And I mean, just for me, as watching it, certainly with far less knowledge on Thompson, but at least a little bit of knowledge on him, I will say as a movie, it kept my interest. It was interesting. It was relatively entertaining. It made me feel horrifically uncomfortable for most of the movie, sometimes in a way that felt not quite profound, but almost there. Like I could see maybe something, I don't want to say like a better filmmaker, because Terry Gilliam is a pretty good filmmaker from what I understand, but like I feel like there were some scenes here that if they were done in a different way could have had like a profound effect.
Yeah.
And I'll say, like I said, it makes me feel uncomfortable. That's not always a bad thing. Mm-hmm. It's a bad thing in terms of I'm probably not likely to watch this movie again anytime soon. but that's, that doesn't mean I didn't enjoy it or that it's a bad movie or anything. But
Sure.
I mean, that kind of discomfort, sometimes I look for that in certain types of movies. I don't typically look for it in my comedies. I understand this isn't a comedy with a capital C.
Right.
This isn't a Jim Carrey vehicle, but
Oh, jeez.
I don't know. It's just,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
it's
and I
a
think,
weird experience.
I think that's part of what led people to dislike the film so much on release, right? It's sort of become
this was
a cult
not
classic.
successful when it came out.
But I think it became a cult classic because the people who are going to be into the cult classic aspect of it are people who are going to be more familiar with the author. But if you market this as a buddy comedy, and the second half of your film is oppression, grimness,
kidnapping a 14-year-old
right,
girl,
yeah,
and
talking about sex trafficking an underage girl, and then you wind up like, oh, it's a buddy comedy, and our final like real sequence before the end is emotionally brutalizing a waitress. What?
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. So I like the film. This sounds like a cop-out, but I like the film for professional reasons.
Okay, sure.
And there are some things that are adapted just so well in this film that I can't help but appreciate it. But this is not something that I'm going to queue up for movie night for just a random collection of people without first making them sit through a 20-minute lecture on the history of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
That's probably fair. If you're ready, let's talk about another film that should have some kind of lecture on the importance of, this Hellfest was also based on a novel.
Was it really?
That's a lie. I was
going to say.
Of course not. It's just popped up as a screenplay at some point. Yeah, Hellfest is... I have mixed feelings on this movie. I do enjoy it, but this is like I guess you could say it's a guilty pleasure. To me, it's really close to being like a genuinely pretty good movie. And let's start off, first of all, Brick, I am a slasher fan. I have no reason to believe necessarily that you are. I don't know.
My familiarity with the genre is limited, and it is limited to sort of the obvious
Halloween,
entries.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Right. Like I have
Friday the 13th,
fond memories of being like a sophomore in college and watching Nightmare on Elm Street for the first time and just laughing my ass off with the wobbly arms that
the wobbly arms.
Like all of a sudden his arms are like 9 times longer than they should be, and they're just doing this like rubbery wiggle thing like something out of an early like Max Fleischer early Disney cartoon or whatever. And it's just a lot of my enjoyment of the genre comes from when I saw it or who I was with when I saw it.
That's fair.
But in terms of like deeper cuts or films like this, not something I have a whole lot of familiarity with.
Well, this movie, it came out in 2018. It came out when I was living in Canada. I saw this, I don't think quite on opening night, but definitely like opening weekend. And it was a completely empty theater. Basically, this movie did not do well when it came out. It made a profit, I'm pretty sure, but it's so hard for horror movies not to make a profit.
Sure.
Like, they envision this as having, like, a sequel every year, and obviously we haven't gotten a Hellfest 2 yet.
Yeah.
I think there's potential for a cult audience for a movie like this, not unlike Fear and Loathing, but there's like especially if it sticks around Netflix still. I mean, I know it's very easy to just kind of lose movies that are on Netflix because there's so much stuff there, but it's the horror movie. I think it's the being set on Halloween, I think has the potential to lure people in kind of annually kind of thing, and there's a chance this movie kind of gets more popular in the future than it is now. But as it is now, I remember I was excited about this movie when I saw the trailer. Might have been the only person on earth who was actually excited about this, but I saw the trailer, and I'm like, okay, that's a fun setting for a slasher movie. Mm-hmm. And of course, I like slasher movies. But then I saw, it's like, okay, rated R. And I'm thinking if this movie came out 5 years or so before it came out, it wouldn't have been rated R. It would have been PG-13. And it would have been worse, because you have the slasher genre has kind of gone in spurts, and we're kind of in I guess kind of a revival of the slasher genre now, with the Halloween series being back, the Scream series being back, Chucky being on a TV show. But you have your original slashers, which kind of peaked in the early 80s. They started fading a tiny bit, and then Nightmare on Elm Street came out. And then that kind of kept it going through the end of the decade. And then once the 90s come along, even the Legacy series were running out of gas. Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, bad movie. Halloween 6, joke of a movie.
Yeah.
And, Jason Goes to Hell, the Final Friday, not that great. And then Child's Play 3 sucks. But then Scream comes out, and Scream reinvents the slasher genre. Now it's modern and hip and self-referential. And then I think Scream was kind of originally planned as like, okay, we're finishing this genre once and for all, but it was really popular, so it's back all of a sudden.
Is that what you have to do
And
when
then-
your content runs out? Like, do you have to go meta and a little bit like postmodern with it? Is that like the natural progression?
Maybe, because you get the revisionist westerns and stuff, and like Unforgiven, which I wouldn't say is like a meta movie, but it's a postmodern in the sense that it's commenting on the genre, I think, and I mean westerns are essentially dead.
Yeah.
But can I say I love that Hellfest isn't really meta, because in my opinion the meta-ness has just worn out. I'm sick of it. I've seen it in everything, and it's just as tired as the pre-meta horror movies, slasher movies were.
Yeah, I went in kind of expecting that, right?
Yeah.
I think the last like big budget slasher film I saw was I think it might have been Scream 4. I think that's the last like big budget one that I saw that was at least kind of coming out fresh. So
Okay.
yeah, like I said, I was going in expecting more of that meta because that's certainly what's kind of Scream is built on. I think I realized maybe halfway through, I'm like, oh yeah, I had this preconception about the film, and it's not there.
And if you haven't seen as many, I mean, maybe you've seen a couple Scream movies, but I've seen so many of because like when Halloween comes out, Halloween has its own ripoffs and knockoffs, whatever you want to call them. And then when Scream comes out, it's got its own kind of imitators and these Scream-inspired movies. And I always talk about this because they all have the exact same poster. You can look it up. Every horror movie that came out after Scream had like the 4 or 5 people standing, looking at the camera in like an arranged position. Every single one of them looks at like The Faculty, Urban Legend, all these other movies. It's a Final Destination has that. I think over time those movies became less violent. And I'm thinking like, because I think then you get like The Ring and you get kind of the rise of PG-13 horror. And at any rate, I mean, it's just a different world that we're living in the late 90s, early 2000s than it was in the early 80s when you could have some weirdo Italian slasher movie that comes out and is popular in the US. Like there's just like some varying levels of like violence and stuff. And I think so the reason kind of the post-Scream movies start to kind of get boring to me is, well, one, they kind of all feel the same, but then two, they don't really deliver on kind of the things you expect out of the genre. And then I guess due to the rise of PG-13 horror, due to found footage, whatever, we kind of lose the slasher again. Scream 4 was like just almost an anomaly when that came out.
Yeah.
But now it's kind of coming back because we got Halloween, which came out like 2 weeks after this movie or whatever. And I just want to say, this movie botched its release date. It's 2018. It's set on Halloween. It came out in like September 29th or 26th or something. And I think that's part of why it didn't do that well at the box office, because I remember thinking about this because, again, Halloween came out a few weeks later. If you want to maximize a Halloween box office, you don't want to come out the week of Halloween because then you're looking at a dip. If you're like a Halloween type, you're going to look at a dip no matter what, your second week.
Yeah.
I think your probably best bet is to go like the week before Halloween. Therefore, you're looking at a big weekend and then hopefully still a very big weekend the second weekend because it's Halloween. You don't want to come out a month early.
No.
Like, what are you doing? Because you're old news by Halloween. This movie wasn't in theaters, I'm sure, at Halloween at most theaters.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to point that out because that angered me when I found out when this movie was being released. I'm like, what are you doing? They probably didn't want to compete with Halloween, though, too.
Yeah. There are probably some very, very good reasons for that sort of thing, like industry reasons about how many films it's showing,
Yeah.
like distribution kind of stuff. Like that's the sort of thing that makes me think that it has more to do with the legalese of releasing a film than I don't know, some bean counters screwing up, but yeah, I would agree. Like if there's a time to release it, the sweet spot is like 10
Right in that
days,
middle of
14,
October, a little bit.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
you got to get it. You got to, because then you avoid that
October
second week
19th
dip. And
release.
yeah, exactly. Well, and not to be too like Midwestern regional about it, but like it doesn't always feel like October in the last week of September, right? Like maybe in your
Yeah,
head you know
but
it's coming.
that will differ depending on where you are in the
Yeah.
country. Because I mean, there's parts of the country that never feel like they're October. If you're in San Diego, it's the same temperature year round
Yeah.
there. You know, I mean, like what?
Yeah, I myself don't get in the mood for a good like slasher horror kind of film until like you've hit that critical difference in the quality of the air where it's just cool enough
Okay,
and
sure.
there's that like that smell of leaves on the air and it's got that crisp kick to it, right? You're not going to get that in late September as often as you would in the middle of October.
And it's interesting you mentioned that because this movie, I have no reason or I have no idea if this was filmed around Halloween. I'm assuming it probably wasn't, but I don't know. But it's filmed in Georgia, and Georgia is a big state for a lot of people to film at. They're filming at Six Flags Over Georgia, which is, or they're specifically the water park of it. I think it's like Six Flags Title or something. I don't know. It has some name to it, but I looked at that and I'm like, oh, that must be the water park of Six Flags Over Georgia. But yeah, it doesn't, like, despite obviously the setting of the movie, we have these like haunted house mazes and stuff like that. It doesn't really feel like autumn to me, and maybe I'm sure it's just because it's in Georgia. But yeah, I don't have experience of what autumn feels like a whole lot outside of the northern United States and southern Canada, I guess you could say. But yeah, you don't see a whole lot of leaves or anything like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think you see any.
Yeah, like one or two scenes contextualizing it, right? If like there's just like a shot, an establishing shot or something where you've got just sort of brown and yellow leaves swirling across the street, right? Or something like that, right? You don't need to overdo it,
Yeah,
right?
it can be
doesn't
simple.
take much.
Yeah, so this movie kind of, this is basically the plot of, and I use the term plot loosely, but this is basically this plot of The Funhouse, the Tobe Hooper film, which is someone is killing people at an amusement park or a carnival. It's carnival in the Funhouse.
Yeah.
Here, it's a Halloween horror maze kind of thing, and it's like they filmed it, as I understand, using like Fright Fest, Six Flags Over Georgia decorations. That's what it said. It said they used mostly that. So I'm trying to find out, when they enter the maze, there's that big eye standing up and kind of moving around. I'm like, is that at Six Flags Over Georgia? Because that looks like an exact replica of the giant eye used in The Killer Eye, the David Dakota movie from the late 90s. So I want to know
Yeah.
if because that looks like an exact replica. Did Six Flags just buy some Charles Band movie props at some point? Maybe.
I know there's like a cottage industry on YouTube of people who will talk about the histories of amusement parks and like
Oh yeah, I've encountered some of that stuff.
like the old defunct rides that don't exist anymore. And a lot of those, especially if they're more recent attractions, a lot of those will have like, they'll find somebody's home videos from whenever and they'll include
Yeah.
that footage. And so I don't know, maybe if you dig up the right stuff, you might be able to get towards an answer with that. But
Yeah, because I looked at it, and I even looked at the IMDb trivia on The Killer Eye, and it didn't have any trivia facts on that movie, so that didn't help. Come on. Anyways, so this movie, like I said, I don't think it's great, but I think it does a lot of things right, and I want to run those by you because I want to dissect this movie.
Sure.
I want to find out why it does all these things right, and it still, to me, isn't a very good movie.
dissecting a slasher movie is spot on for
Yeah. One of the things it absolutely needed to do was make the horror mazes or the horror theme park feel authentic. To me, this pulls it off. I feel like this looks like a place I would love to go to. The mazes look like a lot of fun. Just the outdoor sections where it's not really mazes and it's just people running around scaring people feel authentic. They have the people, or they have one of those guys who kind of comes running in and like slides on the ground and has like a thing of metal on his hands and it sparks when he does that. That's those people are all over like Halloween Horror Nights, and I think they were kind of originated at Not Scary Farm in California. So those are like
Huh.
frequent occurrences at these types of events. And to me, this felt very authentic. And again, a place I would love to go to.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but
I have been to exactly one haunted house in my life, and it was in Pittsburgh, and
Okay.
it was like less one house and sort of like there were like three
Is
different.
it George Romero's house?
No, that'd be cool though.
It's really
Yeah,
haunted.
right.
Tom Savini's just hiding back there,
Yeah.
decapitating people.
It was like three. It was like one of those walkthrough things, but there were three distinctly themed areas. So one of them was like
Okay, yeah.
one of them was like hillbilly hell, and then one of them was this weird. It was very trippy. It was very Thompson-esque, right? But it was like there'd be like the room that's
There's the lounge lizard
Yeah,
thing
yeah.
that could easily be a scene in one of these, yeah.
like there was the rooms that were all painted out black, and they had like polka dots that were painted in fluorescent paint, and then they'd have people who were in like black bodysuits with polka dots painted on them so that they'd like fade into the
yeah,
background. And then my only other experience was going to Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio, for one of their. Yeah, there you go. He's wearing the Cedar Point shirt. Excellent. But I was there for one of their Halloweekends, I think it was called. I
Yeah,
don't know
they
if they
tried
still
to.
call
I
them.
went there this past summer, and they tried to recruit me. And if I lived anywhere near Ohio, I would have done it.
It's funny
I
you
would've
say
done
that
it.
because when I was young, I thought, man, working like the Halloween season as a scarer I don't know, I was what, 16, 17. That sounded
Yeah.
like the best job in the world.
I'm sure there were horrifically negative things about it too, but
Oh,
it
yeah.
seems like it'll be
Like I
some
seem to
fun.
recall that like you'd live in a dorm basically with a whole bunch of
Okay.
other employees, and I'm sure the hours were crappy and I don't know. Yeah.
The pay's not great, I'm sure.
Right, but on the other hand, you get to dress up like a freak and scare the crap out of people, which,
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned, that benefit outweighs any other potential drawbacks. At least
It's up
when I
there.
was,
It's up there.
16, 17. But drawing on like those, that's what was kicking around in my head when I was watching this, and kind of drawing on that, I thought this is perfectly passable as kind of that specific level of it's not overdone, it's not overdeveloped in that way. Like it doesn't look like something out of Hellraiser,
Right.
but it doesn't look cheap. Like maybe it almost looks like the right amount of cheap.
Yeah. Everything seems like something that could be an actual amusement park doing this, I think.
Yeah.
And I think that's important just for the, lack of a better term, realism, I'll say. And I think that this movie needed to accomplish that, and they did. Because if it felt too over the top, then, it wouldn't be as scary, I think. Not that this
Yeah.
is the scariest movie ever or anything, but... I think it kind of needed to get that right, and it did. I appreciate the amount of effort that they went into that. And to be perfectly honest, I don't know how much effort it actually was. This might be very similar to what Six Flags Over Georgia is usually like for Halloween. Like I said, it probably isn't, because I don't know if they shot this around October. They may have. It really works. Like some of the rooms and stuff are pretty cool. Because they've got the different themed mazes, right? The first one they go to is Deform School, I believe was the name of it, which is a clever little name. And that one...
It sounds like exactly the sort of thing that a theme park would come up with.
Exactly,
Right.
yeah. But yeah, so we've got like a creepy demonic schoolgirl kind of maze. We've got like kind of like later on we get like a drug, like a Hunter S. Thompson maze where
Yep.
there's just needles everywhere.
Yep.
That one's a little weird. I feel like you probably wouldn't make a maze like that, but
I feel like
don't
the
know.
lawyers would step in on the liability issues there.
I mean, some of it was pretty cool, like the way they did because they had flashlights and stuff, and then one of the fake dead people on the ground who was really just an actor had like glow in the dark veins painted on them, like that was pretty cool. So
I think the difference for me is that like I'm not expecting this film to lean hard on the realism because it's a slasher film, right?
That's fair.
Like
fair.
I don't.
I'm just saying
No. But
the
what I'm
realism, they
saying
nailed
is,
it.
what I'm saying is specifically is that like I don't need this film to come across as particularly realistic to enjoy the film.
Sure.
So what I get out of it from the way that they set these settings, these scenes, is this is the kind of thing I would be entertained by.
Okay,
at
yeah,
at a carnival,
yeah. I think
right?
I think that's perfectly valid, and I think that speaks to maybe not how great this movie is, but that speaks to maybe just the validity of just you're having a Halloween party, throw this on. This is like a fun thing to have in the background, even if you're not really watching it. I think this movie has staying power in that genre of films, I guess.
Yeah.
So, anyways, what else does this movie do right? The scene where the main character realizes something is amiss, I think, is pretty well done. This is in the deformed school maze. So we've got this killer wandering around. He's got a mask. He's referred to in the credits as the Other. The mask is kind of nondescript, almost like wooden faced or wooden or rocky face kind of thing. But in the opening scene, which happens concurrently with the credits, he is wearing a different mask, and he murders a girl at a haunted maze attraction and then hangs her up with the props to kind of blend her in. And that's how the movie opens. And then eventually, however many years later, our main characters are all at this hellfest, and he shows up as well. He puts on his mask. He takes a knife from a snow cone vendor, which is great. It's not like a normal knife. Like normally you have like a hunting knife or a steak knife, butcher knife or something. No, it's like this knife that has like kind of jagged parts on it that are used for like shaving ice, I guess.
Yeah. So
it's kind of it's slightly unique weapon. I mean, it's just a knife, but
right.
Then so in Deformed School, so we have our main characters. We've got 6 characters here. We've got Natalie, who is best friends with Brooke, and she is visiting Brooke. These are college age kids, and then Brooke is dating Quinn, and Natalie is interested in Gavin, and Gavin is also interested in Natalie. Gavin is the one who gets them the VIP passes. Mm-hmm. Then our other 2 characters are Taylor and Asher, who are dating. Mm-hmm. Anyways, in Deformed School, it's Taylor, it's Brooke, and it's Natalie, and they're all there when a girl comes running in all scared and says, like, please help me, he's after me, and then she ends up hiding in this one spot. And then the killer comes in and just kind of stares at them, and then they're just like, oh, she's over there, and they point to where she is. Then he gets her out, and after like some dramatic pauses, eventually stabs her. But what he does, what I think is neat about the scene, is that the other 2 characters leave, and so it's just Natalie there, and Natalie is saying, well, just do it, like, get it over with. Like, she's thinking, like, she's getting over the fear of these kinds of things, but then he does it, and then she just, like, she doesn't necessarily think someone has just died in front of her, but she knows just something is not right about this guy, this actor, this worker here, who's not a worker, of course. I think that scene is really well done. I think they nailed the presentation of that scene. I think it's effective. I don't think it's not saying it's like the scariest scene ever or anything, but it's well done.
Well, and it doesn't overplay its hand, right? Yeah. It's kind of like what we were talking about earlier with the design elements, right? It's a matter of balance. When you're thinking about sort of what the audience is after or what the audience is taking away from this scene, particularly knowing that your audience is probably going to be at least reasonably well versed in the genre. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't overdo it or saturate the viewer, the audience in that moment with anything more than it needs to. If that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I don't know if phrasing it that way makes a whole lot of sense, but
yeah, well, I think it's kind of interesting just how it, in a very, very small way, like, almost put some blame on the main character in a way that's interesting, because she's the one who sells out this girl that's hiding for her life. I mean, she doesn't obviously know she's doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of an interesting aspect that you wouldn't see in a lot of movies like this, where we're, the main character, we want them to be blameless and we want them to be just wholly good and stuff, especially because this is a slasher genre, so we've got the main character, the final girl, has to be this perfect virgin and stuff. And it's like the movie... The movie kind of plays with that a little bit. I don't believe virginity is ever mentioned specifically, but she is, at the time of going to this amusement park, the only one who isn't in a relationship, and all the characters are trying really hard to get her with Gavin, which happens eventually until he's murdered spectacularly, which leads me to my next point, because there's some really good kills in this movie. I mean, for what that is. I know that's not everybody's thing, but again, this is it being rated R versus it being PG-13.
They don't waste the R rating?
They don't. It's not excessive. It's not Halloween Kills.
Yeah.
Halloween Kills has like 7 or 8 moments that are as brutal as the most brutal kill in this movie, and then has them go on for longer. This isn't that. I think this is like the perfect amount of just like, ooh, that was like cool, but you know, like I would like to love to see more of that. But
Yeah.
And the big one, of course, is Gavin's death scene, which when I saw this in a theater, again, a completely empty theater,
Yeah.
I was pumped when that happened too, because that's like the first kill we have is the opening scene, which is the nondescript girl at whatever other amusement park this is.
Right.
Second kill we have is in Deform School. Mm-hmm. It's the scene we were just talking about. Mm-hmm. Third kill is the first one. It's a character that we care about.
Right.
First time it's a character that we know. And it's brutal. He gets one of those mallets from like the "How strong are you" thing, for those like where you hit on the bell. The killer hits him in the face with it first, which is like stuns him, and he's like gargling. Like the guy's concussed. I don't even know. Like
disoriented.
He's got
pain.
major issues just from that alone.
Yeah.
And then he kind of pushes him over towards that platform where you swing down the mallet, right? Whatever you call that.
Yep.
And then he swings it down, and the head kind of explodes in like a bloody mess, and it's wonderful.
I'm coming at this a little bit behind, right? Because I don't have
sure.
Well, because I don't have as much familiarity with the genre, right? So I don't have a good measuring stick for how quality a particular kill is. But that one,
it's creative though. It's I haven't seen that specific thing before, and I've seen a bunch of horror movies, a bunch of slasher movies. This is something unique, regardless of the execution. I think the execution's good, but just I love the creativity, you know. Because most of the deaths in this movie are just, most of the deaths in this movie are just stabs to the stomach. Like that's what every death in every Scream movie is. Like we've seen it all, but I want a unique kill or two. I think this movie delivers on that.
I'm given to understand that uniqueness and spectacle are part of the currency of horror movies. Right, that's people like from
the good ones.
I've probably read more reviews of horror movies than I've actually watched.
Okay,
or like Wikipedia write-ups or something. It's like, that looks interesting from 30 years ago. How did that? What happened in that film? Right, but that seems to be a fairly common thread. Is that it's the uniqueness and the spectacle. Even though I don't have a good, like I say, a good measuring stick or a good sense of what constitutes unique or spectacular, I feel like the film. How do I want to say this? Like it makes the most of its R rating without just becoming silly.
Yeah, because this death could be played more for comedy than it is, especially because specifically when he hits down on the head, the little ball goes up and he hits the bell, like
Ding.
That he maxed out in strength. But they don't really play, even though that detail's there, that's kind of a cute thing, but they don't really play it for comedy. Like this, it's brutal. Like watching him, and I'm like, okay. And then again, that it's a character that we like, and I don't think this has the best supporting cast of characters, but I think everyone's like, there's no one who's just awful, you know. And I'll say another scene that made this effective is that I'm not surprised Gavin died in the movie. There's usually only one surviving female in movies like this. I'm surprised he died this early. I'm surprised he's the first of the group to die, because he is a genuinely good guy. I think that was just to kind of throw you off, and I think they pulled it off pretty well.
Yeah, I was wondering if that was just to kind of break with form, or if there was some like crunchier narrative reason for him going out that early in the runtime.
Yeah, because later on, the kind of his absence has the security guards thinking, okay, no, someone's playing a prank on you. But it didn't have to be him. It didn't have to be the boyfriend. It could have been one of the other boyfriends, right? So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Another thing that this movie does, I'm going to say it excels at, and this might not mean anything to you as if you're not really a horror fan, but a thing that I complain about a lot in horror movies is we are giving this role, this cameo essentially, to a person who is famous in horror movies, and we are basically just going to waste them on one scene or a couple lines. We've got Tony Todd in this movie. Tony Todd, of course, is Candyman. He's basically wasted in a few of the Final Destination movies where he's like kind of the best part about the movie, but he just gets one scene and he's kind of pointless, and it's like, oh man, could we have gotten more of him? He's great. And here he's like the carnival barker who dresses like a Mardi Gras kind of thing. And I'm not gonna lie, it's not the biggest role, it's not the best role, but he's fun. He seems like he's having a good time. We hear his voice constantly because he's the announcer on like all the, this ride is broken down or whatever. So we hear his voice constantly. But anyways, I didn't feel like he was a complete waste. I didn't feel like obviously it wasn't a big role. I didn't expect it to be a big role, but I enjoyed him.
Sure.
But
yeah,
probably means nothing to you. But Tony Todd, the great Tony Todd, it's good to see him.
Yeah, no, that's cool. It's good to know that that this sort of film will bring in that character, and like you say, not just sort of waste them as set dressing or just give them
almost waste them, but I'm giving them a little bit of respect here. But yeah, because that's like a box that you just tick if you're making a horror movie. It seems like it's like we need like a legacy horror actor. We need a Jeffrey Combs or Robert Englund or Barbara Crampton or somebody. Like we just need someone like that. And it bugs me because I feel like most of those actors are better actors than what we normally see them do, but they're typecast because of what they're famous as. Tony Todd's a good actor. I would love to see him with more to do than he has here.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that he at least is doing something. So, anyways, what else does this movie do right? I'll be honest, I don't think this movie does a whole lot that's wrong, even if I can't think of a whole lot that's like amazing. I mean, is it I've mentioned this, but like, are the supporting characters the best? No. Is the final girl like the best? Like, nah, she's fine. Like a lot of passableness going on in this movie.
Well, I have an idea that I wanted to run past you about this.
All right.
And I'm wondering if the setting elevates the material.
Well, the setting is the material. I feel like, you know what I mean?
I guess that's kind of my point, right? Because we've been talking about all the things that this film does right, but we seem to be arriving at the conclusion that despite doing all these things right, it's not that great of a film. And I'm wondering if it's specifically the kind of the dark carnival thing.
Does a movie like this just have a hard ceiling that it can't pass, maybe?
Or like,
I'm not the biggest fan of the Funhouse. I'll be perfectly honest.
It's got a high base floor. If that makes
maybe
that
that
sense,
too. Yeah,
right. Like because you've got, like I was thinking.
Because I do love the idea of this setting. I love like kind of old timey circus imagery. I understand that's mostly not what's here, but there's a little bit of that with the Carnival Barker with Tony Todd and stuff. So yeah, I don't know.
Well, right, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be old timey. Although I know that. Is it Guillermo del Toro's most recent film is sort of that like
Nightmare Alley?
Yeah, Nightmare Alley does the Dark Carnival thing. Of course, there's a couple of different adaptations of Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. Right, like there was that TV show from way
Penny
back
Dreadful?
when. No, I mean that's a good thing to add to this list. But it was
one of the seasons of American Horror Story is Freak Show.
Right, Freak Show from American Horror Story. Like this seems
which
to be
is heavily influenced by the 1932 film Freaks, which is an incredible film.
Mm-hmm. This seems to be a perennial evergreen field to tell this sort of story, and I'm wondering if
a sub genre here of dark carnival amusement park type things. There's even a tiny bit of it in the movie Us, because Us kind of starts out with the Funhouse, which at the Santa Monica Pier or whatever pier it is.
Okay.
And I mean, most of the movie departs from that, but it has that kind of the opener that's sort of there.
Well, but that, I mean, you see my point, right? Is that, that I'm wondering if just the fact that it's a dark carnival film, even though it's more like a Cedar Point dark carnival than a old-timey Carnival Barker kind of thing.
Sure.
Like, I wonder if there's something about that setting that's just sufficiently attractive enough to cover over some of the reasons that this film might not otherwise work, right? Like if this is set in a, I don't know, if this is set in a hotel or something, then the things that we're identifying as good and fun about the film wouldn't look that way so much.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, like, what does this movie nail on a, for lack of a better term, technical level? Like, the acting's not great. I don't think anyone is awful, but I mean, ain't no one winning an Oscar for this. I mean, again, everyone's fine, but they don't, elevate the material. The scenes with Natalie and Gavin, I actually kind of appreciated this. They're very, very, very clearly improv, and I would have been able to say that long before I ever read the IMDb saying that the director encouraged them to improvise their scenes. But I like that because they're like awkward, uncomfortable, like two people who are very into each other trying to catch up before they actually start making out kind of scenes. That felt natural to me, as awkward improv as it is, where someone watching that, kind of regardless of context, could be saying like, oh, the acting in the scene or the writing in the scene is awful. It's like, no, but it's supposed to be like awkward and uncomfortable. Like, it's kind of good. I like that.
Yeah.
Oh, Asher, by the way, Asher had a pretty fun creative death as well, because, I mean, this may be fun because this is one that I could see people not enjoying. Mm-hmm. I kind of appreciate it, but he gets stabbed through the eye. It's gross. I would say it's a lot more uncomfortable than the mallet scene, just because it goes on a little longer, and eye trauma. Let's be honest, eye trauma. It's not for everybody.
That's exactly right. That's what I was gonna say. Is like there is a certain class of violence that just comes automatically. Like it's almost
eyes
like
are like the one, you know.
Right. Yeah. It's there's something about it that just automatically just gets you, and eyes are. It's almost like it's easy. Like it's a shortcut to some.
I would say eyes and groin injury on film are the two things that can really get to me. Like I've still never seen any of the Jackass movies. I'm not sure I want to.
The other thing for me, and I don't even know why I'm saying this, but the other thing to me is deliberate harm to the teeth. Like, it's different if somebody gets like smacked in the face or punched, right? Like their tooth gets knocked out or something like that. But like if you are intentionally doing specific trauma to the teeth,
okay,
no,
I would have to think of how often that comes up, because I feel like not too often. Like the Little Shop of Horrors, maybe, and that's about it.
Like if somebody's got their victim's mouth open and they're gonna perpetrate violence like tooth by tooth or something.
Okay.
That I gotta check out.
Oh yeah, I guess I've seen some like pulling of teeth. I think that in one of the Hostel movies, I think they pull teeth.
Don't they do everything in the Hostel movies? Like that's just
they kind of do. Yeah,
there's a dumpster for human depravity.
Yep. Anyways, so
yeah,
I guess another point for authenticity would be the having to sign a waiver to move to the section of the park where they're allowed to touch you. I feel like that's something that a lot of movies would overlook, but that is an authentic thing, because there are like hardcore scare mazes out there. I've seen an entire documentary on these kinds of things. There's an excellent documentary on, it has been on Shudder, I believe it still is. It's called Haunters, The Art of the Scare.
Is that the documentary where they talk about like some guy signed up for something and then like 3 days later he got kidnapped and dragged out into the woods and buried in a hole?
Yes, that's the most extreme one they talk about. But yeah, there's different types of haunted houses and or mazes or whatever. And the traditional one, the one that we see in the first section of the film, the one that most people are familiar with, Halloween Horror Nights or whatever, those are called boo scare mazes, or that's the colloquial term for them. And that's where people are allowed to scare you, but they're not allowed to touch you. Mm-hmm. And then there are really, 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 really extreme ones, including there was this one crazy guy who basically tortured people in his own backyard while filming it, and then months later would like send them an edited DVD of what they were going through. And basically he just went as long as possible just to like try and break them. I've heard, and he got a lot of exposure in that documentary, and I heard he's changed his ways a little bit since then, because I think he used to say, in that documentary, I think he makes a point of saying he doesn't have a safe word. Now he does. Yeah, okay, good for him. Yeah. But yeah, but anyways, the whole signing a waiver, I think, is a thing. A lot of movies would kind of overlook that, but really, if you're going into a scenario where people are going to be touching you in attempts to scare you, there would be some kind of liability thing or something.
From a narrative perspective, it's a good way of raising the stakes. It clarifies very effectively for the audience that, okay, we are, we're changing the game.
It's harder now to determine who's the killer and who's just a guy, especially because this is the section of the park where they see that mask that's not the only time we see that mask.
Yeah.
So a lot of people complain about jump scares. A lot of people just don't like jump scares. My co-host Jim has complained about them. I I think there's a time and a place for a
Yeah.
jump scare, and I think there's a difference between a good jump scare and a bad jump scare. But I'll say this: if you happen to be one of those people that hates jump scares in most cases or whatever, I mean, this movie's got a ton of jump scares, but I think it's all perfectly acceptable because this is exactly the environment where there are jump scares, like in real life. So I think it kind of the movie gives itself an excuse or justifies the jump scares, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So
There's a reason. There's like an in-universe reason for it.
yes, exactly. That's a good way to put it.
And I admit I'm not a huge fan of jump scares. They're fine, right? They are a tool, and like any other
Time and
tool,
a
you can
place,
overuse them or you can use them well. I will say that when I was watching this movie at 11 o'clock at night while washing the dishes, I appreciated that I could look over and like focus on the pot full of soapy water that I was washing when the music was indicating that a jump scare might happen.
Right.
I don't know that I would have enjoyed it quite as much if all I was focusing on was the screen. But this is. The jump scares are the bread and butter for the kind of like the Halloween weekends at theme parks. And I didn't have a.
That's all those things are, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just jump scare after jump scare. And it's funny that we kind of, a lot of people, and I'm talking like film snobs or nerds or whatever,
Yeah.
will kind of poo-poo jump scares in films. But then this other medium, for lack of a better term, is like that's literally all. That's all it is jump scares, and those are like some of the most fun things ever. If you just go to one of those, even if you don't expect to enjoy it, you might end up having just an absolute blast. So that was the case with Jim. Jim had no interest in going to this thing in New York, and I took him there, and I think he enjoyed it more than I did, but I loved it too.
That's awesome.
Right. So overall, Hellfest, what did you think of it? I mean, we've kind of been going back and forth.
Yeah.
We've been sharing some of our specifics and not too specifics about.
I'll put it this way: I would probably rank it relatively high in terms of the Halloween movies that I've watched, or not the Halloween movies, but like the slasher films that I've watched. But I don't know if that's because it deserves that rank, or if because my sample size is so limited that
I understand. Yes.
It's something I could see myself returning to at some point as like, oh man, I want to watch maybe if it's specifically for something like I want to watch a Dark Carnival kind of thing. But not the old timey flavor. Like I could come back to this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I mostly agree. I mean, I'm probably enjoyed this more than you, but this is just more in line with the types of movies that I enjoy.
Sure.
I think this is a perfectly passable film. I think, we've talked about what it does well. There's actually a movie that came out around the same time, maybe in 2019, called Haunt, which is a lower budgeted thing. But pretty much the same plot as this, where they're going through like a haunted house thing, and it turns out there are real killers there. And I want to say that had some twists to it too. If you want to watch a movie with this premise, not just like kind of like a bit of a Dark Carnival background, but specifically with people getting murdered in a haunted house environment, Haunt is probably the way to go. It's a better movie than Hellfest, but it's also a bit more disturbing and more kind of low-key and independent. This has kind of a bigger budget, a higher production value.
Sure.
It's more polished. It's more clean.
Okay.
But, yeah, I think this is a fun movie to revisit. I think it's a good movie to throw on if you're just hanging out with a friend around Halloween. I mean, we're talking about it in February. This episode's coming out, I think, in either April or May. So it's not really the season for Hellfest, but I think there is a season for Hellfest. And, I mean, I very well maybe rewatching this in future Octobers.
Yeah, for sure. October's going to roll around, and I'm probably going to think, oh, man, I remember watching this in freaking freezing February. And, maybe, who knows, maybe it'll hit different in mid-October. But I tell you what I will not do is I will not watch it in the last week of September.
Okay, that's, when it came out.
Yeah, exactly.
Huge missed opportunity. We've gone full circle here.
That's right.
All right, Brick, which of these two films do you prefer?
I've got to go with Fear and Loathing, only because
that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I am so enmeshed with it in my professional life that I've got to go with that. But it's really an apples and oranges kind of thing for me.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, they're very different movies. Yeah. I get it. Because I am going to say I prefer Hellfest, and the reasons for that, I mean, is Fear and Loathing a better movie, better, director having a vision type movie? Better acted? Yeah, sure it is. But you know what? At the end of the day, Hellfest is just more fun for me. I mean, it's a horror movie that's got some brutal kills, never gets too uncomfortable. Like, Fear and Loathing makes you feel uncomfortable in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways, not necessarily that are bad, but in terms of if I just want to sit down and watch a movie, Hellfest is just, it's more welcoming to me as an individual, as a viewer, I guess.
Sure.
And, I mean, I don't love either movies, don't hate either movies, but yeah, I think I do just enjoy Hellfest more.
Yeah. You know, you've got to be in the right mood for each one, I suppose.
I think so, but I think part of why I prefer Hellfest is, at least in my eyes, maybe it's just because I like horror movies, I don't think I really have to be in the right mood. I think there are more moods that are considered the right for this movie to put on, whereas Fear and Loathing, I think, in the future, and this is not a knock against Fear and Loathing, I mean, this is true of movies that are amazing, that I love, like Schindler's List. I can't just throw on Schindler's List any afternoon. Like, I have to be in the mood for that. Hellfest, I think I could throw on more or less any time.
Yeah, I think that makes
that's me.
A lot of sense. That's a good way of breaking that down. You're more likely to be in a Hellfest adjacent mood than a Fear and Loathing type of mood. Yeah, I get it.
All right, so one final question. How do you think this works as a double feature?
The question is, which film are you going to take the drugs to most enjoy?
Oh.
Right? If you were gonna load up on some heinous chemicals, do you want the weird semi-historical, like, fever dream quasi cultural commentary thing, or do you want the dark carnival slasher eyeball stabbing?
There's drug potential in that movie too as well.
Yeah,
I'm gonna say, not to directly answer your question, but kind of to answer mine and to kind of respond to that.
Yeah.
I think the directness of Hellfest being exactly what it is, versus Fear and Loathing, which, what is it? It changes its mind frequently, and it's kind of several different things at once. Mm-hmm. I kind of like that as like a refreshing follow-up to Fear and Loathing, a palate cleanser, so to speak.
Yeah.
As long as you're okay with the violence that's in Hellfest, which is, it's violent, it's not excessive, and most people listening to this like horror movies and are okay with that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think it actually makes for a very fun follow-up, even though I don't love either of these movies individually, and I don't, I guess, quite love them together. I do kind of like that just very different second movie there. I think they complement each other in a weird way.
If I had to watch them in order, I think you're absolutely right. I would put Hellfest after Fear and Loathing. We do get a bit of a dark carnival in Fear and Loathing with Bazooko's circus, but not in any big thematic way. Unless you think of Las Vegas and all of America as a dark carnival, which, but that...
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, well, you say not in a thematic way, but does the Hellfest even have themes, though?
Yeah, there you go. But I like describing that as a palate cleanser. I think that the directness, the kind of the more conventional entertainment value of something like Hellfest is going to come better as the second in a double bill than being the first film.
It's the more casual movie. It's the movie that, like, if you're getting really tired and you're not following it that closely, like that you can kind of zoom in and out of, like, how, like, if you're washing the dishes while you're while you're watching it or something. I mean, it's like, it doesn't demand as much attention of your attention as Fear and Loathing does, which you're always trying to figure out exactly what's going on. And there's so many things, just subtle things going on in Fear and Loathing that you gonna have to watch it carefully just to see everything. Yeah, Hellfest, it is what it is.
That's like the Fear and Loathing's release was severely disadvantaged by trying to market it as something that was just purely kind of snacky entertainment that you could drift in and drift out of, broad spectrum appeal, right? It's absolutely not that.
We found our common ground between these two movies because Hellfest was mismarketed by being released in September. It's a completely different reason why it bombed, but
there you go.
It's sort of there. We've got those good old the marketing side to blame kind of for both these films. Hellfest didn't even bomb. It just didn't do great. It didn't do great enough to get us a second Hellfest.
Yeah.
But yet. Fingers are still crossed.
Yeah.
Yeah, yet. I want to thank Brick. Thank you for joining us. And let me tell you, listeners, what we've got up next week. When Jim returns, we're going to be doing another Las Vegas movie somehow, Viva Las Vegas, starring Elvis Presley and Anne Margaret, as well as Death Stalker, the sword and sorcery exploitation Argentine-American film from producer Roger Corman. So that ought to be a lot of fun.
That sounds great.
Be sure to join us next week, and sure to follow us on Twitter at Drive-In Podcast. Check out our Patreon for early access to episodes as well as exclusive commentary tracks. And we look forward to hearing from you in the future.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.